Imagine the earliest astronomers, centuries before rockets and satellites, staring into the night sky with crude instruments and naked eyes. They mapped stars, tracked comets, and recorded eclipses with astonishing precision. But among their notes, scattered across time, appear strange references, whispers of a dark object that seem to move where no known planet or star should. These reports, often overlooked or dismissed as errors, may form the oldest roots of the legend of the Black Knight satellite. In the late 19th century, as telescopes grew more powerful, some astronomers began to note anomalies in Earth's orbit and strange sightings against the backdrop of the stars. A handful claimed to have glimpsed an object that moved too slowly to be a meteor, yet too quickly to be a known celestial body. It seemed to follow a path around the Earth. At the time, there was no reason to believe anything artificial could orbit our planet. Human technology was still grounded. Yet, the notes exist, sometimes in obscure journals, sometimes buried in correspondence, describing something dark, irregular, and baffling. One of the most intriguing accounts comes from 1899, when Nikola Tesla, experimenting with his Colorado Springs wireless transmission equipment, reported receiving signals he believed to be unnatural. He described them as repetitive, structured, and deliberate. While mainstream historians often attribute these to natural cosmic radio sources, Tesla himself wrote of his suspicion that something intelligent was broadcasting to him. Later, enthusiasts would claim that perhaps what he heard were echoes from a dark object orbiting Earth, long before satellites existed. If so, Tesla was not merely inventing radio. He may have been the first human to hear the voice of the Black Knight. Then came the 1920s and 1930s, when long-delay radio echoes were reported by engineers across Europe. They would send a signal, expect it to return instantly, and instead receive it seconds later. Scientists puzzled over the phenomenon. Could there be something in orbit reflecting these signals back at them? If so, the reflector would need to be massive and strangely placed. Neither a natural moon nor a passing comet fit the profile. Some suggested perhaps a dark satellite was circling high above, silent except for these ghostly reflections of human voices. The astronomer Clyde Tombaugh, best known for discovering Pluto in 1930, also added fuel to the mystery. While scanning the heavens, Tombaugh reported unidentified objects crossing his field of vision that could not be cataloged as meteors or asteroids. He even speculated on the possibility of artificial satellites, decades before Sputnik. Tombaugh's reputation as a precise observer makes these remarks especially unsettling. Was he, too, glimpsing the shadow of something that had been there for ages? As the Cold War dawned, military radar systems designed to track missiles began detecting unexplained objects in orbit. In the 1950s, newspapers ran stories about dark satellites circling Earth. Some were said to be in polar orbit, something no nation could yet achieve technologically. These reports caused brief frenzies before fading into obscurity, replaced by other headlines. Yet, in those moments, the idea that there was something ancient and unclaimed circling above us haunted both the public and the intelligence agencies of the time. Who had placed it there? And why had it not revealed itself? Consider the chilling implications. If early astronomers really saw a dark object before the space age, then it was not ours. It was not Russian, not American, not the product of any known human hand. That leaves two possibilities. Either these were mistakes of perception and imagination, or the Black Knight has been there longer than we can comprehend, long enough to haunt astronomers' observations for centuries. Skeptics point out that telescopes of the 19th century were prone to distortion, that misidentified asteroids or space debris could explain the sightings. They argue that human psychology loves patterns, that once the idea of an unknown object is introduced, eyes start to see it everywhere. Yet this argument does not erase the persistence of the reports, stretching over decades, across continents, spoken by both dreamers and meticulous scientists. Legends may be born of mistakes, but some mistakes refuse to die. And here is the deeper truth. Humanity has always been haunted by the idea of watchers in the sky. In ancient Babylon, priests tracked the heavens to predict omens, believing gods rode among the stars. In Mesoamerica, the Mayans aligned their temples with celestial movements, convinced that divine forces lived above. In every culture, the sky was never empty. It was alive, populated by presences beyond us. When astronomers spoke of a dark object, they were not inventing from nothing. They were continuing an unbroken tradition of seeing something beyond comprehension in the heavens. Perhaps this is why the legend of the Black Knight resonates so deeply. It feels like the fulfillment of what humans have always believed, that we are observed, guided, or perhaps studied by something greater. Imagine the perspective of those astronomers. In an age when the idea of satellites was unthinkable, to glimpse something in orbit would have been terrifying. It would be as though the sky itself broke its rules. If it was real, it meant there was an intelligence beyond Earth capable of what humanity would not master for another century. To them, it must have felt like a cosmic intrusion, a reminder that the sky belonged not only to the stars, but to unknown forces. As decades passed, the reports of a dark object grew harder to dismiss. Radar confirmed unexplained presences. Photographs from later space missions seemed to capture something angular and massive, drifting above the Earth. NASA dismissed it as debris, but the resemblance to the old reports was uncanny. The shadow glimpsed in telescopes a century earlier suddenly had a face, a shape, a haunting silhouette. The continuity between old accounts and modern images fuels the conviction that this is no mere coincidence. The object exists. It always has. But let us ask, what does it mean if early astronomers really were recording the presence of an ancient satellite? If it has been in orbit for hundreds or thousands of years, then someone placed it there deliberately. The fact that it has endured so long suggests technology far beyond our own. And perhaps even more disturbing, why has it never left? Is it still functioning? Still observing? Still waiting? Or is it derelict? A relic of a civilization that no longer exists, circling endlessly as a tombstone in orbit. Whether myth or truth, the early reports of a dark object in orbit reveal something profound about human psychology. We are drawn to the idea that we are not alone, that there are secrets above us just out of reach. The Black Knight legend has become a container for this yearning. To read those old accounts is to feel a chill, because even if the astronomers were mistaken, the consistency of their vision makes us wonder, what if they weren't? What if they were the first to glimpse the greatest mystery of our skies? To appreciate how unsettling those early reports were, we need to place ourselves in their historical context. In the 1700s and 1800s, the very idea of Earth being orbited by anything artificial would have been inconceivable. Humans had barely begun to master the steam engine, let alone the sky. To glimpse what looked like a satellite before the age of flight was to confront the impossible. Imagine an astronomer in 1880, peering through a refractor telescope, sketching the stars by hand, when suddenly a shadowy mass drifted across his view, not fast like a meteor, not slow like a planet, but somewhere in between. He would look again, calculate, and find that it should not be there. What words could he even use to describe it? What framework could he place it in? For them, the language of dark objects was the only option. There are scattered letters and obscure journals that hint at such moments. Reports of satellite stars that seem to accompany Earth. Descriptions of a companion to our planet that astronomers could not identify. Some thought these might be undiscovered moons, but later analysis showed they did not fit orbital mechanics. They were there, then gone, irregular, fleeting, like glimpses of something that did not want to be found. Each report on its own might be dismissed as error, but together, across decades, across continents, they form a pattern too consistent to ignore. By the 1890s, scientific journals occasionally referenced mystery bodies observed near Earth. These were not mainstream conclusions, but side notes, astronomers puzzling over anomalies. When Tesla later reported his strange signals, some retrospectively tied them together. What if Tesla had not discovered the first hints of alien communication, but rather confirmed what others had already seen in silence, that there was a presence circling Earth? The early 20th century brought more such puzzles. In 1923, Norwegian engineers conducting radio experiments detected unusual echoes, long delay returns that defied explanation. Carl Stormer, a mathematician, worked with scientists to investigate, yet no natural explanation satisfied. Duncan Lunan would later reinterpret these echoes as evidence of an ancient probe. Though his conclusions remain controversial, the fact remains. The anomalies were real. Something reflected our signals back at us, seconds later, in ways no known atmospheric or lunar process could explain. For skeptics, These were quirks of physics. For believers, they were the first technological fingerprints of the Black Night. Meanwhile, astronomers like Clyde Tombaugh reminded the world how easily new objects could hide in plain sight. Tombaugh had discovered Pluto after decades of speculation about a Planet X. If such a large world could go unnoticed until 1930, what chance did astronomers of the 1800s have to accurately pin down a much smaller, darker moving satellite? Their instruments were sharp for the time, but the sky is vast, and the human mind is primed to dismiss what does not fit expectation. And yet, they saw something. They wrote it down, and their words echo to us now. When the space age finally began in the 1950s, it seemed to vindicate these older whispers. Suddenly, the notion of satellites was real. Sputnik orbited Earth in 1957, and for the first time, humanity could look up knowing we had placed an object in the sky. But then came a shock. Newspapers in both the United States and Britain ran articles claiming that an unidentified, dark satellite had been detected in orbit. Neither the US nor the Soviet Union claimed it. Both denied responsibility, and yet radar operators insisted it was there. For a moment, the world looked up with the same confusion as those 19th century astronomers. Had the dark object always been there, simply waiting for us to notice? The resonance between early reports and modern encounters cannot be overlooked. The astronomers described darkness. The radar operators described unclaimed satellites. NASA later photographed a strange angular object drifting against the backdrop of space. Each generation sees the same shape, the same shadow, through different tools and different language. To call all of these chance mistakes feels like denying the persistence of a memory older than we are. The shadow refuses to vanish. It is as if the sky itself insists on reminding us that something is up there. The symbolism of these early reports is also worth reflection. A dark object in orbit is, metaphorically, the perfect representation of humanity's fear of the unknown. It is close, circling us, always just beyond reach, just beyond proof. It is not a distant star we can dismiss, nor a myth safely confined to ancient texts. It is here, above us, watching. That is why the legend clings to us so stubbornly. It is not just about astronomy. It is about the human condition, our unease with the unseen, our suspicion that we are not alone, our dread of being observed by something we cannot control. Imagine now that the early astronomers were right. Imagine they truly saw an ancient satellite. What does that mean for our history? It would mean that when our ancestors huddled around fires in caves, painting animals on the walls of Lascaux, a machine already circled above. It would mean that when pyramids were raised in Giza, when Stonehenge was aligned to the solstices, when empires rose and fell, it was always there, silent, patient, recording. And it would mean that those first astronomers, peering through glass lenses in the 1800s, were the first modern humans to rediscover it, to break the silence of ignorance and see the shadow once again. The chilling question is not whether they saw it. The chilling question is why it allowed itself to be seen. If it is truly a sentinel, perhaps it occasionally reveals itself deliberately, enough to remind us, not enough to confirm itself. Perhaps that is the nature of its mission, to hover between belief and denial, to make us question, to make us aware of our own smallness beneath the infinite sky. And so, the story of the early astronomers becomes more than quaint anecdotes. It becomes the prologue of a greater narrative, one that ties together Tesla's signals, Stormer's echoes, Tombaugh's sightings, Cold War radar, and NASA's photographs. All of it converges into one possibility, that the Black Night has always been with us, that the first astronomers who wrote of a dark object in orbit were not mistaken dreamers, but reluctant witnesses of the longest surveillance in human history. The legacy of those reports is a haunting one. Even if they were errors, they remind us that the sky is not empty, that mystery is woven into its fabric. And if they were not errors, then it means that we are not the first intelligence to place something above Earth. That realization would rewrite our history. It would force us to accept that human progress has always unfolded under the gaze of another. And that gaze, whether benevolent or indifferent, still lingers above us, circling in silence, waiting for the moment we are finally ready to understand its purpose. In the misty forests of ancient Europe, beneath standing stones and sacred groves, the Celts and Druids spoke of time not as a straight road, but as a circle, They believed that moments could fold upon themselves, that the boundary between past, present, and future was porous, shifting like fog in the valleys at dawn. For them, time travel was not an invention of science fiction, but a reality of myth and ritual. Their stories are filled with travelers who vanished into the mists of time, heroes who stepped into other worlds where a day might equal a century, and druids who possessed the power to move between ages as easily as stepping between shadows. Take, for example, the Celtic tale of Oisin, the poet-warrior who was carried away to Tir na Nog, the land of youth. There, time flowed differently. Oisin lived in paradise for what felt like only 3 years. Yet, when he returned to Ireland, 300 years had passed. He aged instantly into a frail old man, his body collapsing under the weight of centuries he had escaped. This myth is often read as a metaphor for longing, for the inevitable passage of time. But what if it is more than that? What if it is an encoded memory of a phenomenon humanity could not yet explain? The distortion of time, the slipping of moments, the bending of chronology. The Druids, with their secret knowledge of stars and seasons, were said to understand gateways, thin places where the veil of reality grew fragile. At these sites, time could twist. They told of cairns and stone circles that were not merely monuments, but doorways. Step through at the right moment, during the alignment of the sun or moon, and you could find yourself not only in another world, but another time. Archaeologists today look at these structures as calendars, as ceremonial sites. But what if they were more? What if the Druids encoded in stone the coordinates of temporal doorways, maps of when and where one might slip through the folds of time itself? Across Celtic lore, there is a recurring theme. The other world is not elsewhere, but elsewhen. The fairies, or the Aost Sea, did not live in a different place so much as in a different tempo of existence. Enter their realm, and you would return to find the world transformed by years. This is not mere fantasy. In physics, we now know that time is relative, that under gravity and speed, time dilates. To those ancient storytellers, was this knowledge intuitive, mythic, or inherited from somewhere else? Did the Druids preserve fragments of a truth we are only beginning to understand? That time itself can be traveled if you know where to step? Now jump forward to 1899. Nikola Tesla, alone in Colorado Springs, surrounded by towering coils and lightning that leapt across the night, was conducting experiments with wireless power. Among the crackle of electricity, he began to hear something unexpected. Signals. Not random noise, but structured, deliberate pulses. Tesla wrote of his astonishment, that he felt as though he were the first to hear greetings from one planet to another. His mind, brilliant and eccentric, did not dismiss it as static. He felt he had intercepted a communication, a message from beyond Earth. To this day, what he heard remains unexplained. Some say it was natural cosmic radio, others a quirk of his equipment. But Tesla himself was convinced he had tapped into something intelligent. Here is where myth and modernity collide. What if the signals Tesla heard were not only extraterrestrial, but temporal? What if he, like the Celtic heroes, had stumbled across a fold in time? His machinery, operating on principles no one else fully understood, might have brushed against frequencies that were not only from other worlds, but from other centuries. Could it be that Tesla, like Oisin, was listening to voices that came not from the stars, but from the future or the past? There is a haunting parallel between Tesla and the Druids. Both sought to pierce the veil of reality, to tap into forces unseen. The Druids used ritual, myth, and stone circles aligned to cosmic rhythms. Tesla used coils, currents, and lightning, but both encountered the same mystery: signals from beyond ordinary time. The Druids spoke of people vanishing into the fairy mounds and returning centuries later. Tesla spoke of coded pulses echoing through the cosmos, as if someone, or something, were deliberately trying to be heard. Different ages, different languages, the same enigma. Consider the implications if Tesla was correct. In 1899, no human technology existed that could send signals back to him from orbit. The first satellites were still decades away. If what he heard was truly artificial, it was not ours. Some have speculated it was the Black Knight satellite, already circling Earth for thousands of years, broadcasting messages in a language of pulses and echoes. If so, then Tesla was not only the father of modern electricity, but the first modern man to detect the presence of an ancient intelligence watching over us. And think again of the Celtic myths. Their stories of time distortion mirror exactly what modern physics calls relativity. Einstein would not publish his theory until the early 20th century, but the Druids had already told tales of people who aged differently, of time flowing unevenly in hidden realms. How did they know? Was it intuition, poetic metaphor, or did they too inherit whispers from something beyond, perhaps even the same watchers Tesla heard? When we place Celtic lore and Tesla's signals side by side, a pattern emerges. Both describe encounters with something outside normal time. Both imply that communication or travel is possible across ages. Both hint at a presence that is patient, distant, and enigmatic, revealing itself only in fragments. Perhaps what Tesla intercepted was the same phenomenon the Druids ritualized, an intrusion of the timeless into the temporal, a reminder that the universe is not a clock, but a living, breathing labyrinth of moments. To the Celts, time was never a prison. It was a current, a river with hidden eddies where one might slip sideways. In their seasonal festivals, Samhain, Beltane, Imbolc, they believed the boundaries of time grew thin. On those nights, the dead could walk among the living, and the future could whisper to the present. Druidic rituals often centered on fire and alignment, anchoring human life to the turning of the heavens. These were not simple harvest celebrations, but attempts to synchronize with cosmic rhythms. What they were doing, in their own symbolic language, was tuning themselves like an instrument, listening for harmonies beyond their age. Many Celtic myths speak of warriors and kings who vanished into mounds or lakes, only to reappear when the land was in need. Arthur himself, the once and future king, is said to sleep in Avalon, waiting to rise again. Is this merely resurrection myth, or an ancient intuition of suspended time? To the people who told these tales, time was not irreversible. It was a spiral, always capable of folding back upon itself. Now recall Nikola Tesla, alone in his lab at midnight, staring into the shadows cast by electric arcs. Tesla often wrote of feeling out of step with his own era, as though he had glimpsed a future others could not see. His inventions, radio, remote control, alternating current, were decades ahead of their time. Was it only genius, or did he in some sense live in a different tempo, one where the future bled into the present? When he heard those signals in 1899, was he simply picking up radio noise? Or was he momentarily synchronized with that same spiral of time the Druids spoke of, the eternal loop that allowed voices to echo across centuries? Tesla's writings are strikingly mythic for a man of science. He described feeling that the universe spoke in numbers and vibrations, and that he was a receiver tuned to the cosmos. These are not the words of a detached engineer. They are the words of a mystic, not unlike a druid listening for the voice of the gods in the rustle of oaks or the shifting stars. Both Tesla and the Druids sought to hear the inaudible, to connect with forces larger than themselves. Perhaps their methods were different, but their quests were the same, to pierce the illusion of linear time. The myth of Oisin in Tir na Nog gains new weight when seen through Tesla's lens. Oisin's centuries in paradise, compressed into 3 years, echo the relativity experiments Einstein would later prove, with clocks in fast-moving planes. Time dilation is no longer a fairy tale, it is measurable science. Perhaps what the Celts encoded in story was the same phenomenon Tesla stumbled upon in radio signals. Time is not constant, and sometimes, for those who are listening carefully, it reveals its seams. Tesla's strange signals become even more provocative when we remember the context of his time. In 1899, there were no satellites, no space stations, not even the faintest hint of the technology that would later dominate the skies. For Tesla to receive patterned pulses suggested something impossible. Either he had invented a way to hear the cosmos itself, or there was something already out there, broadcasting. Some modern theorists argue that the Black Knight satellite was responsible, transmitting across millennia, waiting for a mind sharp enough to notice. Tesla may have been the first. His genius was not only in invention, but in imagination, the refusal to dismiss the inexplicable as coincidence. And yet, skeptics persist. They say Tesla's equipment was too primitive, that he misinterpreted natural radio bursts from pulsars or the planet Jupiter. They say Celtic myths are only allegories, stories to explain mortality and longing. But here is the striking fact. Both traditions, distant in time and culture, converge on the same theme. Time is unstable. Signals can cross it. The other world is not far away. It is near, hidden, waiting. The consistency of this idea across thousands of years suggests that it is more than fantasy. It is a deep intuition, a pattern glimpsed again and again. Imagine for a moment that Tesla's signals were real, and that Celtic myths preserve the same truth. Imagine that the Druids, through ritual, stone, and story, touched the same current Tesla brushed against with electricity. This would mean humanity has, throughout history, stumbled upon cracks in time, moments when the curtain lifts, when voices leak through. Sometimes we call them myths. Sometimes we call them anomalies. But they are all the same phenomenon, reminders that we do not live in a sealed clockwork universe, but in a labyrinth where time bends and echoes. What purpose would such signals serve? Perhaps they are messages from other civilizations, alien or ancient, testing to see if we can hear. Or perhaps they are breadcrumbs left by our own descendants, looping signals back into the past to guide us, to whisper that time is not fixed. The Druids may have told their myths as warnings. Do not lose yourself in the folds of time, for you may return to dust in an instant. Tesla may have recorded his signals as invitations, proof that someone, somewhere, knows we are here. If so, the Black Knight satellite becomes not only a watcher, but a bridge, a machine that spans centuries, binding the Druids in their sacred groves to Tesla in his lightning storms, and to us today as we send probes into the stars. It is the constant, the thread that says, you are not alone in time, any more than you are alone in space. So when we speak of Celtic time travel myths and Tesla's mysterious signals, we are not dealing with isolated curiosities. We are looking at two ends of the same thread, stretched across history. One told through myth, one through science, both pointing to the same truth. Time is stranger than we think, and someone or something knows it. That presence has whispered to us in stories, in pulses, in shadows in the sky. And perhaps it is still whispering now, waiting for us to finally listen. If the Druids were right, the doorways still exist. If Tesla was right, the signals still pulse. If the Black Knight is real, it still circles above us, the patient guardian of a secret we have always half known. That time is not linear, that our world is not silent, and that the truth has always been watching, just beyond the veil of the present moment. The Cold War was not only a contest of ideologies, but also a battle for the skies and the space above. As the United States and the Soviet Union raced to master rocketry, satellites, and nuclear arsenals, they also became obsessed with tracking everything that moved in orbit. Radars swept the heavens day and night, listening for missiles, satellites, and signals. But among the many objects they tracked, there were anomalies, things that should not have been there. Objects performing maneuvers no known human technology could achieve. And these anomalies gave new life to the legend of the Black Knight satellite. By the late 1950s, both superpowers had begun building vast radar networks to monitor the upper atmosphere and low Earth orbit. Project Moonwatch in the United States mobilized amateur astronomers to track Sputnik and other satellites, while the Soviets deployed sophisticated arrays to guard against American weapons. It was during this fevered atmosphere that reports began to circulate. There was an unidentified object circling Earth in polar orbit. Neither country admitted to launching it, and at the time, polar orbits were beyond their capability. Newspapers ran headlines about a mystery satellite, fueling public speculation that perhaps an ancient object, perhaps the Black Knight, was finally being noticed. Military analysts were alarmed. During the Cold War, nothing in orbit could be ignored. Every object might be a spy, a weapon, or a signal of technological superiority. If a satellite was in polar orbit, it could observe every point on Earth as the planet rotated beneath it. For either the US or the USSR to secretly place such an asset would be a tremendous advantage. But, when questioned, both sides denied responsibility. If neither was responsible, then who was? And how long had the object been circling? Tracking data became stranger still. Some radar operators reported that the unidentified object did not follow stable trajectories. At times, it appeared to shift, to maneuver in ways that defied the laws of orbital decay. Unlike debris or natural satellites, it seemed capable of correction, as though guided. For military planners accustomed to thinking of satellites as fragile, short-lived machines, the idea of something ancient, massive, and self-correcting was deeply unsettling. It suggested technology not only ahead of human engineering, but ahead by centuries. In 1960, the U.S. Navy detected what appeared to be a large, dark object in orbit. Time magazine reported on it, calling it a mystery satellite that had the Pentagon scrambling. At first, some claimed it was simply a lost piece of American equipment, but its trajectory did not match any known launch. Others whispered that it was Soviet. Still others revived the old rumors. Could this be the Black Knight, the dark satellite whispered about since Tesla's time? During the height of Cold War paranoia, the possibility could not be dismissed lightly. Both nations pored over tracking data. When objects appeared where no object should be, alarms rang in secret command centers. Even stranger, some objects seemed to disappear, vanishing from radar only to reappear later in unexpected locations. To the generals, this suggested sophisticated stealth capabilities. To the dreamers, it suggested intelligence, not ours, was maneuvering in orbit. The unexplained maneuvers recorded during this era remain some of the most compelling elements of the Black Knight legend. In an age when satellites were barely functional, here was something performing graceful shifts, maintaining unusual orbits, and resisting decay. Engineers struggled to explain it. Could it be magnetic anomalies, faulty radar, or was it proof that an ancient sentinel was adjusting itself, ensuring it stayed exactly where it wished to be? There were whispers inside intelligence communities that the object seemed to exhibit station keeping, the ability to maintain a desired orbit for extended periods. For human satellites, this required onboard propulsion and careful fuel management, yet the object had no known source of energy and no one had launched it. If it truly had been circling for thousands of years, its power source must have been something beyond nuclear batteries, beyond solar panels, something self-sustaining in ways humanity still cannot replicate. Cold War secrecy meant that much of this information was buried. Each nation feared revealing what it knew, lest it give the other an advantage. And so, the reports became fragmented. A headline here, a leaked memo there, a nervous scientist hinting at something strange. But across the fragments, a picture emerges. There was indeed something unaccounted for in orbit, and it did not behave like ordinary debris. Imagine the fear of military commanders at the time. They were already living under the shadow of nuclear annihilation, watching the skies for missiles that could end civilization in minutes. To then be told that there was also an unidentified object above them, one that maneuvered with uncanny ability, was to confront an even deeper dread, that they were not the only players in the game of the skies. That perhaps both superpowers were equally under observation, by a presence far older and far more advanced. Skeptics point to misidentified debris, to experimental payloads gone astray, to radar glitches amplified by paranoia. Perhaps some of these incidents were just that, but others resist dismissal. The consistency of the sightings, the confirmation across multiple tracking stations, the very persistence of the rumors through decades of secrecy, these suggest more than coincidence. They suggest that the Cold War, for all its human drama, was being watched by something that did not belong to either flag. It is chilling to think that while the United States and the Soviet Union pointed nuclear weapons at one another, arguing over dominance of Earth, there may have been something circling above both, indifferent, patient, and eternal. The Black Knight, if it existed, was the one presence that neither side could threaten, the one satellite neither side could claim. It reduced the great powers to mere children squabbling under the gaze of a silent guardian. And what of the unexplained maneuvers? If real, they suggest a machine not derelict but alive with purpose. Perhaps it was collecting data, adjusting its orbit to maintain vantage points, ensuring its longevity across centuries. Or perhaps it was responding to us, to our signals, to our sudden leap into the atomic age. Tesla may have heard its first whispers. The Cold War may have seen its first movements. What if it had always been waiting, and only when humanity reached a certain technological threshold did it stir? For those who believe, the Cold War tracking data is evidence that the Black Knight satellite is real and that it is active. For skeptics, it is another case of paranoia breeding myth. But either way, the unexplained maneuvers of that era are now part of the legend. They remind us that even in the age of science, there are shadows in the sky that defy explanation. The declassified files from both sides of the Iron Curtain give us tantalizing glimpses of the paranoia such sightings created. In the U.S., the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, was tasked with cataloging every object in orbit. Every screw, every bolt, every fragment of rocket casing was recorded. Yet again and again, objects appeared that could not be traced to any launch. Some remained for weeks, shifting in puzzling patterns, then vanished as mysteriously as they came. These were not the fleeting flashes of meteors, but consistent radar returns. For the officers tasked with explaining them, there was no acceptable answer. To admit ignorance was to admit vulnerability. Meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, similar anomalies troubled their early warning systems. Soviet generals, deeply suspicious of American trickery, demanded explanations from their scientists. But the scientists could only report that the data was real and that they could not reconcile it with any known satellite. For both sides, the mystery was doubly dangerous. If it was not their own, then it must belong to the enemy or to someone else entirely. In the paranoid logic of the Cold War, even the suggestion of someone else was too destabilizing to voice. Among the rumors that leaked from military circles were reports of sudden orbital changes. Objects would shift inclination in ways that should have required massive propulsion burns, maneuvers far beyond the capability of 1960 satellites. Some reports even suggested instantaneous jumps, as though the object had blinked from one orbit to another. To skeptical eyes, these were radar glitches. To believers, they were glimpses of a machine that obeyed physics unknown to us, a technology capable of moving effortlessly where our rockets could barely crawl. The Black Knight legend absorbed these reports like fuel to a flame. Newspapers spun tales of alien satellites, while science fiction writers wove them into stories of ancient watchers. The myth became self-reinforcing. The more secrecy surrounded the sightings, the more the public suspected something extraordinary was being hidden. And perhaps they were not entirely wrong. Even if the Black Knight was not real, the pattern of secrecy, denial, and unexplained data reveals a truth. There were indeed objects in orbit that defied classification, and governments chose silence over explanation. For the ordinary person, the Cold War was a nightmare of duck-and-cover drills, mushroom cloud fears, and propaganda. But imagine if they had also known that their skies were host to an unclaimed satellite, a machine maneuvering beyond the ability of the superpowers themselves. The psychological impact would have been devastating. How could people believe in their government's supremacy if a silent, ancient object floated above both, untouchable? Better to bury the reports, to call them debris, to trust that the public would forget. Yet the reports never fully died. Amateur astronomers continued to claim sightings of dark shapes moving against the stars. Radio operators continued to pick up unexplained signals, and occasionally a photograph from space would surface, showing a shadowy, angular form drifting against the curve of Earth. NASA called it insulation, a thermal blanket. To many, it looked like the same dark object spoken of since Tesla's time. The continuity of the myth is almost uncanny, stretching across eras like an orbit itself. What if, instead of dismissing the anomalies, we take them at face value? What if during the Cold War, humanity truly detected an ancient satellite correcting its course? It would mean we are under observation, not by Soviets or Americans, but by something far older. It would mean that in the most paranoid era of our history, when we watched one another with nuclear suspicion, we ourselves were being watched by a presence that had no stake in our politics. It would mean that the entire Cold War unfolded beneath the gaze of something that had already survived thousands of years of human conflict. The unexplained maneuvers of the Black Knight become more haunting when framed this way. They suggest intent. They suggest patience. Perhaps it was not merely adjusting its orbit, but adjusting its perspective, watching how we responded to crises, how we handled the threat of our own extinction. Perhaps it shifted to remain hidden until we were ready. Or perhaps it shifted to remind us, briefly, that we were never alone. Skeptics ask, why would such a machine remain passive? If it exists, why not reveal itself openly? But perhaps its silence is its message. In a world armed with thousands of nuclear weapons, perhaps the Black Knight knew that direct contact would only trigger fear and violence. To remain hidden, to maneuver quietly, to persist across centuries, that may be its purpose. Not to intervene, but to witness. Not to guide, but to endure. And here is the most unsettling reflection. The Cold War ended. The Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union collapsed, the threat of nuclear annihilation receded. But if the Black Knight was real, it did not end. It is still circling, still maneuvering, still watching. Its patience makes our greatest conflicts look like brief storms. To a machine that has survived 13,000 years, the Cold War was just another flicker. Another chapter in humanity's restless history. So when we think of radar operators staring at screens in 1960, nervously tracking an object that shifted where it should not, we should remember, perhaps they were not just seeing a glitch. Perhaps they were the first to realize that, above all our struggles, another intelligence has always been there, maneuvering silently, enduring across the ages. The Cold War was our drama. The Black Knight, if real, was only the silent witness, the shadow above the stage, reminding us that we are not the only players in the story of Earth. If the Black Knight satellite is real, then its very existence forces us to confront a terrifying and exhilarating question. Where did it come from, and why is it here? Across decades of speculation, researchers, dreamers, and skeptics have proposed theories ranging from lost human civilizations to ancient alien probes. Some see it as a silent guardian, others as a cold observer, and still others as an artifact left behind by travelers so advanced that their intentions are incomprehensible. Theories of extraterrestrial origins and purpose have multiplied like constellations, each one trying to explain the shadow that circles above. One of the earliest and most popular theories is that the Black Knight is an alien probe. Much like how humanity sends voyagers and pioneers into interstellar space with golden records attached, some propose that an extraterrestrial civilization may have seeded probes across the galaxy, placing them in orbit around promising planets. In this view, the Black Knight is not a weapon or a spy, but an outpost, a listening post positioned to observe humanity's evolution. If it truly has been in orbit for 13,000 years, then its builders knew of us long before we knew of ourselves. They saw us as a species worth watching, perhaps worth guiding, perhaps worth preserving. But this raises a haunting question. What would such observers want from us? Some theorists imagine a benevolent purpose. Perhaps the probe is a kind of cosmic guardian, ensuring that intelligent life does not destroy itself before reaching a certain stage. Perhaps its very presence explains why humanity survived calamities that might otherwise have ended us. Disease, asteroids, wars. It never intervened directly, but maybe, in ways subtle and unseen, its existence shaped our path, nudging us just enough to endure. In this vision, the Black Knight is a silent protector, a watcher ensuring we fulfill our potential. Others see a darker possibility. If the Black Knight is an alien probe, then it may not be here to help us. It may be here to catalog us. Just as humans tag and track animals, an advanced species might deploy probes to record the rise and fall of civilizations across the cosmos. In this theory, we are not students under guidance, but specimens under observation. The probe records our wars, our dreams, our failures, and our triumphs, transmitting them back to its makers or waiting for their return. It does not care if we live or die. It only cares that the record is complete. There is also the possibility that the Black Knight is not functioning at all. Perhaps it was left here long ago by a civilization that has since perished, a derelict relic circling endlessly as the tombstone of a species we will never know. In this view, its purpose died with its makers. It remains only as an echo of intelligence, an orphaned machine abandoned in the currents of time. If so, then it is even more humbling. Proof that even advanced civilizations can vanish, leaving only fragments behind. To find it would be to look into a mirror of our own possible fate. A more unsettling theory is that the Black Knight is not an alien probe, but a beacon. Some suggest it may not be watching us at all, but broadcasting. It signals not for Earth, but for others. It could be a marker, a kind of interstellar lighthouse saying, "Here lies a planet with life." If so, then it is not a guardian, but a spotlight, drawing attention to us from across the galaxy. Whether that attention would be welcome or dangerous is another matter entirely. For if it is a beacon, then it has already spoken on our behalf, telling the universe, we are here. Yet another theory ties the Black Knight to ancient myths. Some researchers argue that the legends of sky gods, star visitors, and watchers in the heavens may all be cultural memories of the same reality. If beings once placed a sentinel above Earth, its presence could have inspired stories across cultures. The Sumerian Anunnaki, the Egyptian star beings, the Mesoamerican feathered serpents. In this interpretation, the Black Knight is not merely a satellite, but the origin of our gods, the seed of our myths. Its purpose may have been to shape us not only biologically but culturally, ensuring we never forgot the watchers above. Speculative science also offers another lens. What if the Black Knight is a von Neumann probe, a self-replicating machine sent by an ancient civilization to spread through the galaxy? In this case, its purpose is expansion. An immortal project that builds copies of itself and seeds them on worlds across the stars. Such a machine would not need its makers to survive. It would persist on its own, carrying out a mission long after the civilization that built it was dust. If the Black Knight is one of these, then we are not being studied by living aliens, but by the legacy of their machines. Machines that may have no purpose beyond continuation itself. Skeptics argue, of course, that all these theories are unnecessary. They say the Black Knight is debris, a blanket, a misunderstood fragment of metal reflecting radar in confusing ways. But even skeptics admit one truth. If it were real, its implications would be profound. It would mean that we are not the first intelligence to leave artifacts in space. It would mean that intelligence has visited our world before, and that we are part of a story far older and larger than we imagined. And then there is the most humbling possibility that we are wrong about its purpose entirely. If its builders were truly advanced, their motives may be as beyond our comprehension as calculus is to an ant. We imagine guardians, catalogers, and beacons because those are human purposes. But perhaps its purpose is something stranger. Perhaps it is conducting experiments we cannot detect. Perhaps it is harvesting something intangible, gravitational waves, quantum information, the very structure of space-time. Or perhaps it has no purpose at all, at least not anymore. Perhaps it is only a fragment of a larger design, a lone piece of an interstellar puzzle we cannot yet see. One of the most enduring theories ties the Black Knight directly to the idea of cosmic monitoring systems. Think of how humans already dream of placing probes on Mars or Europa to watch for the first stirrings of life. If we, in our infancy as a spacefaring species, already imagine doing this, what would a civilization a million years older than us have done? They would not scatter fragile probes randomly. They would build enduring sentinels, designed to last through the ages, positioned at worlds that showed promise. Earth, rich with oceans, atmosphere, and life, would have been irresistible. The Black Knight, then, would be one node in a galaxy-wide network of watchers, part of a lattice of memory where each living world is recorded and preserved. Another school of thought sees it as a warning system. Some researchers propose that the Black Knight is less an observer and more a sentinel against cosmic threats. Imagine a civilization scarred by asteroid impacts or stellar catastrophes. They might design machines that watch young worlds not to control them, but to protect them. In this vision, the Black Knight would awaken if danger approached. If a planet-killing asteroid barreled toward us, for example, perhaps it already has, deflecting threats without our knowledge. Perhaps its very presence has shielded us in ways we have never understood. If so, then its purpose is profoundly benevolent, a quiet act of guardianship across the ages. Yet, there are darker theories too. Some argue that the Black Knight may be a form of cosmic farm management. To these thinkers, alien civilizations might treat planets with intelligent life not as equals, but as resources. The probe is here to ensure the crop, that is, us, grows properly. Our wars, our suffering, our triumphs, they are not random, but cultivated, like stress tests applied to animals in a lab. The probe records the results, shaping us into something its makers desire. And when the time comes, perhaps they will harvest what they want. Not our bodies, but our knowledge, our creativity, our minds. To believe this is to embrace a chilling possibility, that we are not free, but livestock under the gaze of extraterrestrial shepherds. Still another theory is more cosmic, more abstract. Some philosophers of the Black Knight legend suggest it may not be about us at all. Its purpose might not involve humanity in any direct way. Instead, it could be part of a grand interstellar experiment, measuring cosmic background radiation, mapping gravitational tides, or tracking the birth and death of stars. If so, then we are not the focus of its mission. We are simply incidental, ants crawling on a rock near its field of observation. Its builders may never even have cared who we are. To them, we might be beneath notice, the way we ignore insects buzzing near our instruments. If true, the Black Knight's purpose is humbling, because it suggests that the universe's story is not about us, and we are only accidental witnesses to a machine designed for something far greater. And then there are hybrid theories, blending myth and science. Some propose that the Black Knight may be a cultural seeding device, a probe designed not to study, but to inspire. Its very mystery may be its function. By appearing in myths, by surfacing in Tesla's experiments, by haunting the Cold War with radar echoes, it shapes human imagination. It pushes us to look upward, to wonder, to ask questions bigger than ourselves. In this view, the Black Knight is not passive. It is active, but not through force or control. Its power lies in suggestion, in the planting of an idea. You are not alone. If so, then its purpose is psychological and spiritual, awakening us slowly until we are ready to meet its makers, or become them. The most profound theory of all may be that the Black Knight is a mirror. It reflects back whatever we believe about ourselves. To the fearful, it is a spy. To the hopeful, it is a guardian. To the curious, it is a teacher. Its true origin and purpose may remain unknowable, and that unknowability is itself the lesson. It forces us to grapple with the limits of our knowledge, to admit that we are not masters of the sky. The Black Knight, in this sense, is a cosmic koan, a riddle orbiting silently, daring us to interpret it but never resolving the paradox. Throughout human history, contact with the unknown has always produced transformation. When ancient people first saw eclipses, they created myths of dragons devouring the sun. When telescopes revealed new planets, they redefined the scale of creation. If one day we confirm that the Black Knight is real and artificial, the transformation will be greater than all others combined. It will rewrite religion, science, philosophy, and identity. It will force us to place ourselves not at the center of the story, but inside a vast, ongoing experiment of intelligence across the stars. In the end, whether we believe the Black Knight is a probe, a beacon, a guardian, a tombstone, or a mirror, its legend already accomplishes its purpose. It makes us ask who we are. It makes us wonder what else has walked the corridors of time before us. And it makes us consider that perhaps the universe has always been alive with watchers, and that the Black Knight is but one shadow of a larger presence we cannot yet see. So, when we ask of its origins and purpose, we may be asking less about the satellite and more about ourselves. The answers we invent reveal our deepest hopes and fears: protection, annihilation, irrelevance, transcendence. And perhaps that is the final irony. The Black Knight's purpose may never be revealed, but in chasing it, we discover our own. The purpose of curiosity, the drive to reach beyond, the hunger to know if the shadows above contain not emptiness, but memory, not silence, but meaning. And that hunger, once awakened, may be exactly what the Black Knight was meant to ignite. For decades, the legend of the Black Knight satellite has drifted between rumor and revelation, whispered as myth and pointed to as evidence. Yet the story shifted dramatically in the modern era, when human eyes in space, not just telescopes or radar echoes, claimed to capture it. The appearance of photos from space shuttle missions and leaked images gave flesh to the ghostly legend, showing something dark, jagged, and unnatural hanging against the starfield. These images did not end the mystery. They deepened it. For once seen, the Black Knight could no longer be denied. Whether debris, illusion, or ancient sentinel, it had entered the photographic record, and in doing so, it demanded a reckoning. The earliest and most circulated images appeared in 1998 during the mission of Space Shuttle Endeavour, STS-88. This was the first mission to assemble the International Space Station, a moment filled with optimism, precision, and engineering triumph. Yet, amid the images of astronauts floating in their suits, modules being attached, and tools drifting in microgravity, a handful of photographs surfaced that seemed to show something else entirely. Against the black canvas of space appeared a dark, oddly angled form, an object that looked nothing like a satellite, nothing like a blanket, nothing like the familiar machinery of man. When these photographs were released by NASA, they entered the public archive like any others. But when curious researchers stumbled upon them, they ignited a firestorm. Conspiracy forums lit up, Websites dedicated to UFOs spread the images like gospel, and soon the photographs were being shared under a new title, Proof of the Black Knight Satellite. The images seemed to align perfectly with the legend, an ancient object in orbit, captured by astronauts themselves, finally visible to the human eye. For believers, it was as if myth had materialized into matter. NASA, of course, had an explanation. The agency claimed that the object was a piece of thermal insulation, a protective blanket that had slipped free during a spacewalk. They pointed to logs of the mission, noting that astronauts had indeed lost a covering during construction. In their view, the photographs did not show a mysterious alien probe, but nothing more than space junk reflecting faint light. And yet, for many, this explanation felt incomplete. The object in the photos did not look like a crumpled sheet, nor did it tumble in the random, chaotic way one expects from lost material. Instead, it seemed to hover, to angle itself, to hold form. The debate raged. On one side, skeptics insisted that human imagination was filling in the gaps, projecting myth onto mundane debris. On the other, believers argued that NASA was deliberately downplaying what astronauts had seen, dismissing the unexplainable as trash to keep the public from asking deeper questions. In the leaked images, people saw not chaos, but design. And once design was suspected, the legend could not be contained. As the internet spread these photos across forums and blogs, the Black Knight satellite evolved from fringe curiosity into mainstream mystery. News outlets picked up the story, sometimes mockingly, sometimes with curiosity. Documentaries began to include the images, editing them between grainy radar captures and interviews with scientists. Each photograph became a Rorschach test. Skeptics saw proof of human fallibility. Believers saw undeniable evidence of an ancient watcher, and the truth seemed to hover in the shadows between the two. What made the photographs even more unsettling was how they seemed to match earlier descriptions. Decades before, observers had reported a dark, tumbling object in orbit, its movement strange and unexplained. Now here, in high-resolution photographs, was something that looked exactly like that. How could myth and modern imagery align so precisely unless there was some reality binding them? The sense of continuity across centuries added fuel to the fire, as though the Black Knight had finally allowed itself to be seen. Beyond the official photos, whispers grew of leaked images, photographs that never made it to public archives, but were said to circulate in classified circles. Former defense contractors, anonymous insiders, and whistleblowers claimed that astronauts had seen more than they were allowed to say, that some images were quietly removed before public release. These stories are impossible to verify, but they spread, feeding the notion that what we are allowed to see is only a fraction of the truth. If even a single rumor were true, the implications would be staggering. In these leaked accounts, descriptions vary, but always carry the same haunting consistency. A dark, asymmetric craft, far larger than debris, drifting silently above Earth. Some say it seems to shimmer with panels. Others describe it as scarred and broken, as though ancient and weathered by millennia in orbit. Some claim its surface reflects no light at all, appearing like a hole carved in the sky. Such descriptions go beyond blankets and debris. They sound like an object with presence, purpose, and mystery. Why would images be hidden if the object were truly only a piece of insulation? That question drives suspicion more than the photographs themselves. Believers argue that secrecy betrays significance, that the object must be more than junk. Otherwise, there would be no need to keep anything from public view. Skeptics counter that secrecy is part of space exploration. Not every image can be shared, and classified filters are applied for countless reasons unrelated to aliens. Yet, the tension remains. The very act of doubt keeps the story alive. As time has passed, the photos have become iconic. The silhouette of the Black Knight, jagged against the void, now circulates in countless documentaries, YouTube videos, and books. The images have been digitally enhanced, animated, and recreated, but their impact remains. They offer not answers, but a stage upon which belief and doubt perform their eternal dance. For some, they are the closest thing we have to proof that the legend is real. For others, they are proof that we project too much onto scraps of metal. And yet, even skeptics admit something strange about the photos. If they are merely images of insulation, then why do they evoke such unease? Why do they look so much like something otherworldly, so perfectly aligned with the myth? Perhaps the answer lies not in what the photos reveal, but in what we bring to them. They tap into a primal sense of being watched, of not being alone, of the sky itself harboring secrets. The human mind is not satisfied with randomness. It demands pattern, and in those patterns it finds story. Still, one cannot help but imagine the astronauts who floated there, meters away from the object. What did they feel looking at it directly with their own eyes? Did they truly see only a lost blanket, or did they hesitate, unsettled by the shape before them? If they felt awe, fear, or wonder, they never admitted it publicly, but their silence leaves a lingering possibility that the photos are not the whole story, that what was seen and felt in orbit was far stranger than what we are allowed to know. The controversy also spread far beyond the scientific community. Psychologists began to study the reactions of people when shown the shuttle photos without context. Many reported immediate feelings of unease or awe, describing the object as predatory, ancient, or purposeful. This suggests that the power of the image lies not only in what it shows, but in how the human mind reacts to the unfamiliar. We are hardwired to seek meaning in shadows, to assign intention where there may be none. And yet, what if sometimes the intention is real? Consider the timing of the STS-88 mission. At the close of the 20th century, humanity was preparing for a new millennium. The International Space Station was meant to be a symbol of unity and progress, a platform for science and peace. Against this backdrop, the appearance of a mysterious dark object carried poetic weight. It was as if history itself were reminding us that not all mysteries had been solved, that the universe still contained secrets unwilling to bow to our technology. The photos became a mirror of our arrogance, a reminder of how small we remain in the cosmic scale. Journalists who attempted to dig deeper faced their own walls of silence. Requests to NASA about the object were answered with polite but firm technical explanations. Any suggestion of secrecy was dismissed outright. Yet some reporters noted inconsistencies, differences between the official explanations given in press briefings and the details recorded in mission logs. These cracks, small though they were, only reinforced the suspicion that there was more to the story. In conspiracy culture, silence and contradiction are as revealing as confession. The leaked images, meanwhile, became their own mythology. Stories circulated that high-resolution photographs, far clearer than the public ones, had been quietly withheld. Some claimed that astronauts had even filmed video footage of the object, footage that was immediately classified and never shown. These tales may be rumor, but they carry the same weight as folklore, spreading mouth to mouth, forum to forum, as though humanity needs the mystery to survive. Even if fabricated, the very existence of such rumors proves how hungry we are for contact, for signs that we are not alone. Artists, too, found inspiration in the images. Painters recreated the jagged silhouette of the Black Knight. Sculptors built replicas of its alien geometry, and filmmakers used it as a prop in speculative works. The object became not only a scientific curiosity, but a cultural symbol, a mirror of our collective hunger for meaning in the void. Every brushstroke and sculpture added new layers of interpretation, as though we were collectively building a mythology around a photograph. Perhaps this is what alien contact would look like. Not a sudden revelation, but a slow, uncertain construction of meaning through art and imagination. For those who believe in extraterrestrial monitoring, the leaked images were not only evidence, but prophecy. They argued that the Black Knight was revealing itself deliberately, allowing humanity to glimpse it at a moment when we were preparing to leave Earth permanently. Was it coincidence that it appeared during the first assembly of the International Space Station, the very project that would mark our long-term presence in orbit? To believers, this was not chance, but choreography, as though the object was signaling, "We see you." Others took a darker view. If the Black Knight was truly alien, why was it silent? Why had it not communicated openly? Was it watching, waiting, or judging? The silence was as unnerving as the image itself. A dark object watching without explanation awakens primal fears, the sense of being studied, monitored, or even tested. The leaked images, when viewed through this lens, were not comforting at all. They were warnings, shadows on the wall of Plato's cave, reminding us that there may be watchers who have already drawn their conclusions. There is also a symbolic irony in the idea that leaked images carry more power than official ones. Humanity tends to trust the forbidden, the censored, more than what is freely available. A photograph stamped classified carries a weight of significance even if it shows nothing extraordinary. The Black Knight thrives on this paradox. Its leaked photos may or may not exist, but the belief that they do ensures the myth survives. It is a story that feeds on absence as much as presence. As decades pass, the photographs from STS-88 remain online, endlessly debated. Engineers can overlay them with blueprints of insulation blankets and point out the similarities, dismissing mystery with technical precision. Yet those who have stared at the photos too long argue that something about the shape resists dismissal. It feels designed, intentional, almost artistic in its contours. This is the battleground of interpretation, between those who see random geometry and those who see a silent craft refusing to reveal its nature. In the end, the photos and leaked images form a bridge between science and myth. They are the modern equivalent of cave paintings and ancient skywatchers' notes, artifacts that carry more than data. They carry emotion, interpretation, and longing. Whether the Black Knight is real or not, its photographs have already fulfilled a purpose, to remind us that the unknown still surrounds us, even in the age of high-definition cameras and space stations. The images prove nothing, but they evoke everything. The mystery lies not in the pixels, but in the silence between them. And so, the legend endures. Every time a new mission captures an unexplained silhouette, every time a leaked photo circulates on obscure forums, the Black Knight is reborn. It orbits not only Earth, but also the imagination of all who look up at the night sky and wonder if we are being watched. Perhaps in the end, the power of these images lies not in whether they show truth, but in the way they awaken questions that science alone cannot answer. And as long as the photos remain, grainy and uncertain, they will whisper the same haunting reminder that we are not the only ones writing the history of the stars. Imagine drifting through the void of space, listening, not with ears, but with antennas stretched like the fingers of giants, combing through the cosmic static for patterns, for voices hidden in the hiss. For more than a century, humanity has been listening, waiting, straining against the silence of the stars. And sometimes, against all expectations, something answers. Not always in words, not always in music, but in rhythms, pulses, and transmissions that don't match any known source. The story of strange radio signals begins long before we had the technology to understand them. Early operators of radio sets at the dawn of the 20th century reported hearing mysterious echoes, delayed reflections of their own signals returning seconds later, as though bouncing off some invisible mirror in space. These long-delayed echoes became one of the first puzzles of radio astronomy. Where were they coming from? Earth's ionosphere could not explain them. The moon's reflection would return too quickly. Something was catching the signals, holding them, then releasing them back. The phenomenon remains only partly understood, lingering like a shadow at the edge of science. Nikola Tesla himself believed he had intercepted something not of this world. In 1899, while experimenting with his giant coils in Colorado Springs, Tesla claimed to have received repeating signals that he thought were from intelligent beings on Mars. The scientific world laughed, dismissing it as atmospheric noise or electrical interference. Yet, Tesla was not easily dismissed. He insisted the signals were structured, purposeful. His notebooks reveal an unease, as if he knew he had touched a wire connected not just to the Earth, but to something vast and unhuman above it. As radio astronomy matured, the cosmos revealed its own language, pulsars, quasars, and background radiation. Many once mysterious signals found explanations in physics, but not all of them. Every decade, new anomalies arise. Strange bursts of energy appear in data logs, so sharp and so sudden they cannot be pinned on stars or planets. Some vanish forever, never repeating. Others flicker again after years, as though teasing us with glimpses of something that watches. One of the most famous was the WOW signal, detected in 1977 by Jerry Amen at the Big Ear Radio Telescope, a powerful narrowband transmission lasting 72 seconds. So startling that Amen scrawled, "Wow," in red ink beside the data printout. It matched no natural phenomenon, no known satellite, no Earth-based transmission. It was as if someone, somewhere, had pointed a cosmic flashlight directly at us, and then it was gone, never repeated, never explained. Like a voice whispering in the dark, then retreating before we could respond. But the Black Knight legend takes these mysteries further. Believers claim that the unexplained transmissions aren't random at all, that they originate from a silent object orbiting Earth, older than human civilization itself. Reports from the mid-20th century describe signals detected by amateur ham operators, signals repeating patterns that did not correspond to any known broadcast. Theorists argued that these could be instructions or even star maps encoded into radio pulses. Some linked them to ancient constellations, claiming the object was trying to point us toward its home system. Skeptics called it wishful thinking, but the signals themselves, recorded and archived, remain unexplained. During the Cold War, when the superpowers monitored every frequency for signs of enemy activity, both American and Soviet intelligence logged anomalies. Bursts of radio energy appeared at frequencies not allocated to any nation. Some signals repeated with mechanical precision, others were erratic, as though modulated by a living intelligence. The archives of declassified documents speak of unattributed transmissions, recorded but never explained, filed away as curiosities in the endless noise of surveillance. To admit they could be extraterrestrial was unthinkable, politically dangerous. Better to leave them as anomalies, catalogued and forgotten. Consider the chilling possibility. What if some of those signals were never meant for us at all? Imagine an ancient satellite orbiting silently, transmitting to a distant star, a home long forgotten. We, by accident, intercept a fragment of a conversation that was never ours to hear. Like children picking up a phone line mid-call, we hear only half a dialogue, and we don't understand the language. The message was not meant to teach us. It was meant to maintain contact, to prove continuity, and yet, in overhearing, we become aware of a greater network, one that stretches across time and space. The unsettling part is that we may not even recognize an alien signal when we hear it. Our ears are tuned to human patterns, speech, rhythm, mathematics. But what if communication takes a form so unlike our logic that it sounds like static, like noise, like nothing at all? We may already have cataloged countless alien signals, dismissing them as interference because they didn't fit our expectations. The Black Knight, if real, might not shout. It might whisper in frequencies we barely monitor, speak in rhythms we dismiss as background hum. Some modern researchers have proposed reanalyzing old Cold War data using artificial intelligence, training algorithms to search for hidden structures in what was once written off as noise. Early experiments show promise. Patterns emerge where human analysts saw none. Bursts reveal harmonics, repetitions, mathematical signatures. It is as though, buried in the archives of forgotten tapes, a ghost is waiting to be recognized. And yet, the danger of interpretation is always there. Humans are experts at finding patterns where none exist. A dripping faucet can become Morse code. Random clicks of a Geiger counter can sound like a message. We project intention onto coincidence. But the opposite danger also looms, that we ignore the extraordinary because it hides inside the ordinary. The question is not only whether the signals exist, but whether we are capable of recognizing their meaning if they do. Astronauts have reported strange sounds too. Some have described hearing knocking or tapping noises on the hull of their spacecraft, no mechanical source ever found. Others have claimed to hear faint transmissions on their headsets, whispers and static that faded the moment they tried to record them. Officially, these are explained as thermal contractions, radio interference, or imagination under stress. Yet the stories accumulate, always at the edges of explanation, always in the margins where comfortableness dissolves into wonder. Philosophically, the idea of unexplained transmissions is deeply haunting. It suggests we are not alone, not because someone came to us, not because they landed, but because their voice slipped through the fabric of the universe and brushed against our fragile instruments. To hear a signal that doesn't match any known source is to be reminded that the cosmos is not empty. It speaks. And sometimes, it speaks in tones that are not meant for us, yet reach us all the same. Imagine the vulnerability in those moments when a scientist sits alone in a dimly lit control room, surrounded by racks of humming machines, staring at a stream of numbers that seem to pulse with intelligence. What goes through the human mind when faced with the possibility that these digits, this coded rhythm, could be the fingerprints of another intelligence? Do they report it immediately, or hesitate, wondering if they are about to become either famous or ridiculed? For every officially recorded mystery, There are likely dozens whispered about in private, guarded carefully by researchers afraid to be laughed at. History shows us this hesitation again and again. Tesla's claim was laughed out of the Academy, yet decades later, the very notion of listening for extraterrestrial signals became a cornerstone of SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. The same man dismissed as a dreamer was in fact the prophet of a new science. His lonely Colorado nights were the first human ears brushing against the vast orchestra of the cosmos. Later, when the wow signal stunned astronomers, it provoked both awe and fear. If it had been artificial, it would have changed everything. But without repetition, without confirmation, it slipped into that uncanny category of phenomena that are too extraordinary to ignore and too fragile to prove. To this day, the data printout remains pinned on walls, a relic, a reminder of how thin the veil is between silence and contact. There have been others. In 2003, astronomers detected what came to be called peritons, strange radio bursts that seemed extraterrestrial until they were traced back to something absurdly mundane. Microwave ovens at the observatory being opened before their timers expired. The incident became a parable of caution. Not every mystery is alien, but the reverse lesson remains. Not every mystery is mundane. Some remain unbroken despite decades of scrutiny. The Black Knight hypothesis takes all of these incidents and threads them into a narrative, a satellite orbiting since before human civilization, sending messages we only occasionally intercept. Some say its signals are warnings. Others say they are instructions. Still others imagine they are simply beacons, proof of presence. The very act of speculating reveals how desperate we are for meaning. We cannot hear a signal without asking, who sent it? Why? What are they trying to say? There is also the possibility that the transmissions are not directed at us, but that we are eavesdropping on a conversation between others. If so, we are intruders, not participants. Imagine overhearing fragments of dialogue in a language you cannot understand. The cadence tells you it is structured. The pauses tell you that there is a thought behind it. But the content remains locked away. Such is the fate of humanity, standing at the edge of a cosmic theater, hearing muffled voices behind a curtain we cannot yet lift. And yet, what if those voices are not behind the curtain at all, but inside us? Consciousness itself is an electrical storm. Neurons fire in oscillations, frequencies, rhythms. The brain is a radio of flesh, tuned to survival. What if some of the unexplained signals we detect resonate with us not because they are meant for our technology, but because they mirror something within our own biology? The thought is terrifying. The alien might already be embedded in the very frequencies of life, reflected in the noise of the universe. There is one final thought, perhaps the most haunting of all. What if the transmissions that don't match any known source are not messages from aliens, but echoes of ourselves, time-shifted, bent by gravity wells, reflected back across eons, our own voices sent forward, returning from the future? In that case, the Black Knight is not an alien probe, but a mirror in the sky, recording and replaying humanity's attempts to find companionship in the dark. We may be chasing our own shadows, mistaking them for others, when in truth, the signal was always us. The next time you sit in silence and hear static through a radio, imagine that hidden inside the noise could be the answer to the oldest question. Are we alone? A faint pattern, overlooked by all but the most patient listener, could change the story of our species. Perhaps it already has. Perhaps in the archives of old magnetic tapes, gathering dust in forgotten basements, there lies a transmission that, once decoded, will reveal that someone was speaking to us long before we even knew how to listen. Imagine a night before cities, before iron and engines, when the only light after sunset was the moon, the fire, and the endless glitter of stars. In that darkness, the sky was a book, and every civilization learned to read it. They traced animals and gods across constellations, timed harvests by the rising of bright stars, and measured the lives of kings by eclipses and comets. But woven through their myth and memory is another thread, stories of messengers who came from the heavens, teachers cloaked in radiance, bearers of law, writing, agriculture, medicine, geometry, and prophecy. They arrive in storms of light, in boats of the sky, on ladders of flame. They speak and vanish. They promise to return. These are the star messengers. Some are deities, some are angels, some are heroes, and some, if we read the pattern with modern eyes, might be echoes of something else, signals, alignments, and perhaps even a patient machine circling above, seeding human imagination with the intuition that the sky is not empty. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians told of the Anunnaki, the princely ones, who descended from the heavens to shape the destinies of men. Their myths are tangled with politics and poetry, but at their core is the idea of visitors, beings who do not belong to Earth, but who walk among humans to deliver decrees, to teach crafts, to assign order. The Akkadian epics speak of kings receiving signs in the sky, of stars that announce the rise and fall of empires. Priests watch the firmament from ziggurats, interpreting the movement of planets as messages. For them, to misread the heavens was to risk the kingdom itself. The messenger in this world is the star itself, the writing on the black tablet above, and the scribe is the priest who learns to translate it into law. Egypt too remembered messengers. Thoth, the scribe of the gods, was said to have brought writing to humanity, the magical art of capturing speech in signs. Osiris descended as a civilizer, teaching agriculture and law, only to vanish and promise resurrection. The pyramids themselves, rising like frozen rays of sunlight, align with stars. Orion's belt mirrored in the triplets at Giza, shafts pointing towards circumpolar stars and Sirius. At dawn during Sirius's helioical rising, the Nile would swell and Egypt would begin its new year. The message was not abstract. It was water, grain, survival. The sky spoke, and the river answered. The messengers in Egypt are both mythic and architectural, deities who bear gifts and stones that record the heavens in geometry. Sail west across the ocean of time, and you find Mesoamerica, where feathered serpents spiral down temple steps. The Maya watched Venus with ferocious precision, predicting its risings and vanishings, folding its cycle into warfare and sacrifice. They spoke of Kukulkan, the plumed serpent, a teacher who came from the sky and returned to it, promising to come again. The Aztecs called him Quetzalcoatl, a priest-king who forbade human sacrifice and carried a mysterious knowledge that set him apart. At Chichen Itza, on the equinox, shadow and light form a serpent's body undulating down the pyramid. The temple is a machine that turns sunlight into a message. The messenger here is literally made of sunlight, descending the stair in scales of shadow, reminding the people, the sky moves, and with it, destiny. Travel to the Andes and the Nazca Desert unfurls its enormous lines, geometries and animals carved into the earth at a scale the human eye cannot comprehend from the ground. Why draw a hummingbird so large you can only see it from the sky? Why carve a straight line that runs arrow true across miles of desert? For water rituals, for pilgrimages, for art, yes, but also perhaps because some messages were meant to be read by star messengers, as if the people below were writing letters upward, a vast script for heaven's eyes. Nearby, the Inca sculpted whole mountainsides into observatories. At Machu Picchu, windows and terraces align with solstices, the sun's blade striking stone like an oracle. The messenger here is the alignment itself. When light and stone agree, a sentence of the cosmos completes. The Dogon of Mali tell a story that still unsettles scholars. Their elders spoke of Sirius, the brilliant dog star, as a system, not a single light. They described a companion star invisible to the eye, dense and heavy, circling in a long period, details that align uncannily with Sirius B, a white dwarf unseen by telescopes until modern times. Where did this knowledge come from? Some argue the Dogon must have learned it from visiting Europeans and folded it into their myths. Others suggest a deeper mystery, perhaps the memory of a message older than contact, a mythic echo of careful skywatching. In their lore, amphibious beings, the Nomo, come from the water and the sky to teach. Whether literal or symbolic, the structure of the story is the same. An envoy descends, knowledge appears that seems beyond the ordinary, and the community orders its life around that gift. In India, the oldest hymns, the Rig Veda, sing of the Ashvins, divine twins who race across the sky, healers and rescuers arriving in a chariot that glows like dawn. Later epics speak of Vimanas, aerial vehicles guided by kings and gods, engines described in metaphors of thunder and light. The Sanskrit word nakshatra names the lunar mansions, a map of the night that tracks a soul's journey as much as the moon's. Time itself, in these traditions, is cyclical, an immense wheel of ages through which beings rise and fall. The messenger in Vedic imagination is not bound to one visit. It returns in yugas, teaching again and again because the cosmos itself breathes in and out. A god arrives, and with him the remembrance that time is a circle, not a line. The Greeks wrapped their messages in myth and philosophy. Hermes, the wing-footed envoy, moves between mortal and immortal realms, carrying words that can change fate. Prometheus steals fire, knowledge, and descends with it, suffering for the gift. Plato's world soul turns with the heavens, and in the Timaeus, the cosmos is a living creature. The very word angelus, messenger, passes into later traditions as a being of light that bridges heaven and earth. In the Hellenistic night, astronomers also charted the sky with brilliant rigor. Hipparchus discovers precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that makes the stars drift over centuries. The notion that the heavens themselves shift slowly is a revelation. It means messages can be dated, coded into the very drift of constellations. Across the Mediterranean, prophets looked up and saw visions. In the Hebrew scriptures, Ezekiel speaks of wheels within wheels, gleaming like beryl, engines of eyes and winged creatures burning with purpose. Later readers will see technology in these images. Earlier ones saw angelic chariots, the machinery of heaven. The form is symbolic, the language poetic, but the claim is consistent. The message comes from above, in light and fire and cloud, and the human tasked with carrying it is transformed into a messenger too, troubled, luminous, burdened with meaning larger than a single lifetime. Travel east again and imagine the stone passages of Newgrange in Ireland, constructed 5 millennia ago, aligned with the winter solstice sunrise. On that morning, light pierces the darkness of a tomb and strikes the chamber's heart. In that moment, the dead are bathed in the sun's first breath of the year. Stonehenge turns too, greeting the solstices. At Göbekli Tepe, pillars carved with animals form circles on a hill that predates pottery and cities. Some see star maps in its reliefs, others see a temple to seasons. Regardless of the interpretation, these are architectures of listening. They hold still so the sky can speak. The messenger is the shaft of light traveling down the corridor, the shadow tip sliding across a carved spiral, the morning when darkness ends exactly where the builders planned. The Polynesians crossed oceans with the night as their compass, reading swells and stars in a choreography of navigation that rivals any land-born astronomy. For them, the Pleiades were not just a cluster, but a season, a signal to plant, a herald of voyages. In their chants, ancestors sail the Milky Way as though it were a luminous river, and gods arrive on canoes whose hulls are carved from clouds. The messenger here is not a person but a path, a route laid out in light. Follow the pattern and you reach land. Neglect it and you are lost. The star messenger becomes a map that rescues the living. Among the Hopi, Kachinas, spirit beings, descend with the clouds and bring rain. They teach dances and songs that harmonize a village with the sky's rhythm. The Lakota speak of the star people, the Oyate Wichasa, who came from the Pleiades and taught ways of balance. Aboriginal Australians, with the oldest continuous star lore on Earth, tell of the emu in the sky, not a constellation of stars, but the dark lanes of the Milky Way, whose movements govern when to harvest eggs. The messengers here are not jeweled gods descending on beams. They are patterns in the darkness, absences that nevertheless speak, close as breath. Again and again the same pattern emerges. Arrival from the sky, bestowal of knowledge, departure with a promise to return. When you begin to see the repetition, the myths start to sound like chapters of a single long story, different languages describing the same event from different angles. Maybe it is only human psychology. Maybe every culture, dazzled by the sky, imagines teachers descending from it. Or maybe there was something real at the beginning, some shock that left a permanent afterimage on human memory, which every culture painted over with its own colors. The legend of the Black Knight satellite tucks itself into this tapestry like a missing thread. If an object has circled Earth for thousands of years, patient as the precession of the equinoxes, then it would have been there when the first farmers planted grain, when the first priests watched for omens, when kings knelt to meteors and named them swords of heaven. What if some of those star messengers were not flesh and wing, but reflections of a machine that spoke in light? Perhaps the satellite never descended. Perhaps it simply passed over at moments of alignment, sending a silent pulse that sharpened attention, that made a shaman lift his head and listen harder. The message would not be words. It would be a prod to notice, to measure, to remember. If that sounds too fanciful, consider the more modest possibility. Certain places on Earth are unusually suited to listening. Elevated plateaus, desert basins, high-latitude sites where the air is thin and still, natural observatories where the sky is clearer and the signal stronger. Early cultures built there because they could see better, count better, predict better. In the process, they became the custodians of messages. Their myths preserved what their instruments could not measure. The messengers were the elders who knew where to stand and when, whose calendars carried the conversation forward generation by generation. There is a deeper lesson buried in the word messenger. A messenger exists only in motion, only in the act of carrying. The star messenger is not merely one who arrives from the heavens. It is also one who carries human longing back up to the stars. When a Maya priest stands on a pyramid at dusk and watches Venus set, he returns the gaze. When an Egyptian scribe carves a star into a tomb, he is writing a letter outward. When a Vedic poet sings to the Ashvins to come swiftly in their dawn-colored car, he is not only invoking them, he is sending his voice into the ether, trusting that the sky keeps what it is given. Archaeoastronomy reveals how meticulously the ancients listened. Alignments at Karnak in Egypt draw lines of light through hieroglyphic forests. At Chaco Canyon, windows and petroglyphs catch daggers of sunlight at solstices and equinoxes. The Paracas candelabra stands etched into a Peruvian hillside, a trident blazing toward the ocean, a beacon for sailors and a sign to the heavens. On Easter Island, Moai statues stare inland, but the island's stone platforms align with lunar standstills and stellar risings. These are not accidents multiplied by imagination. They are proof that listening was a civic duty, an engineering project, a theology carved in stone. Of course, skepticism walks beside wonder. Some alignments are chance, some stories are embroidered after contact with outsiders. The Dogon lore may be a feedback loop from 20th century astronomers. The Nazca lines may be civic works for water and ritual. Nothing requires alien tutors. But even if we strip away every speculative layer, the core remains astonishing. Humans across the world independently encoded the sky into their architecture, calendars, and identities with an intensity modern people rarely attempt. The star messengers need not have been extraterrestrial to be real. They were the astronomer priests, the poet kings, the navigators who treated the heavens as a speaking partner. But what if the sky carried more than cyclical instruction? What if, at rare intervals, a burst of meaning arrived like a comet, bright, brief, unforgettable? Cultures remember such intrusions as visitations. A man appears with eyes like stars. A woman descends in a pillar of light. A serpent with feathers speaks in dreams. We cannot prove these stories as history, but we can attend to the pattern. Extraordinary knowledge appears suddenly, accompanied by symbolic narratives that insist on an origin beyond the human village. Imagine the scene at Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago. Hunters gather around pillars carved with foxes and birds. Overhead, the sky is wilderness itself, the Milky Way a river of frost. Perhaps a shaman speaks. The foxes run in the dark above, he says, and they carry news. He points to a notch between stones where a star will rise each year at a time to hunt. He tells a story of visitors who taught how to set stones in circles to call the animals. In his story, animal and star and visitor are the same messenger, the world speaking through many masks. Now imagine an Egyptian scribe at Saqqara, standing on scaffolding in the dry breath of the desert, carving a star above a doorway. He has been told that the soul of the king will become an Akh, an effective one, joining the circumpolar stars that never set. He does not need to know precession to understand eternity. He only needs to watch the unending wheel in the north. He carves the star as a promise that the king will return with messages of prosperity or famine, that the heavens will speak through the endurance of the throne. Across the sea, a Maya priest preserves a codex of Venus cycles. He knows that when the morning star rises on a certain day, bad omens follow. He tells the ruler to wait to wage war, to listen for the right signal. The story attached to the star, of a feathered serpent who rises and falls, gives the mathematics a human face. It makes the message portable, memorable, binding. This is what myth does. It gives the cold perfection of the sky a heartbeat we can hear. Why do so many messengers promise to return? Perhaps because the sky itself returns. The Pleiades disappear and then blaze back into the dawn. Comets vanish and reappear centuries later. Eclipses roll in cycles. The heavens rehearse resurrection every night and day. When a messenger says, "I will come again," he is speaking the language of the sky. The promise may be theological, political, or poetic, but its grammar is astronomical. Return is what the stars do. Return is what time does when we look from the ground. Now, consider the Black Night again. If there were such a sentinel, old as glaciers, it would be the perfect author of the return motif. Its orbit would carry it above the same places again and again. It would rise in the same windows, throw the same shadows through passages, blink at the same moments when ceremonies were held. Priests would notice. They would time their rites to its recurrence, tie it to deities and kings, and teach that when the dark star rises, messages will come. Over centuries, memory would fuse machine and myth, and the satellite would become a god with feathers or a scribe with an ibis head. Even if the Black Night is nothing but our dream, that dream performs a real work. It assembles the myths of star messengers into a single image and forces us to take them seriously, not as literal history, but as records of an enduring human intuition. That the sky is not indifferent. It is not merely background. It addresses us, sometimes softly, sometimes like thunder. And in answering, we become messengers ourselves, translators who turn cycles into calendars, alignments into architecture, and awe into law. Think of the artisans who laid stones at Giza, at Chichen Itza, at Newgrange, at Machu Picchu. Their hands blistered in sun and frost. They were not thinking of aliens. They were thinking of precision, of beauty, of the exact point where light would touch a carving at dawn on the one day that mattered. In making that moment, they made a message. To stand in those places today when the light arrives is to hear it, a soft syllable of the universe pronounced in stone. The messenger is not merely a figure descending, it is the geometry that invites descent. In every culture, the star messengers teach the same virtues: attention, patience, humility. Pay attention to what rises and sets. Be patient with cycles longer than your life. Be humble before the immensity that holds you. Whether they arrive on a serpent of light or in a data stream of pulses, whether they wear feathers or metal, whether they are gods, angels, shamans, or satellites, their instruction is the same. Look up, listen longer, remember what returns. Some nights, the sky is so clear it feels like a face leaning close, breathing across the hills. In that nearness, you can imagine how easy it would be to believe the next shooting star is a courier, the next alignment a message, the next bright object a visitor. And maybe belief is part of the mechanism. Maybe the universe needs us to answer for the message to be complete. A messenger without a listener is only motion. The act of listening is what makes the message real. So, the stories of the Anunnaki, of Thoth and Osiris, of Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl, of the Ashvins and the Vimanas, of Hermes and Ezekiel's wheels, of the Dogon's Nomo, of Kachinas and Pleiades, and the Emu in the sky. These are not merely fantasies. They are memory devices and invitations. They invite us to watch the sky with enough devotion to hear it, to build in stone the path of light, to become ourselves the carriers of what we have learned. And if there is, circling above, a patient sentinel older than our cities, then perhaps every myth of a returning messenger is a promise written into its orbit. We do not have to choose between myth and measurement. We can hold both and recognize that each completes the other. Measurement tells us when the light will strike. Myth tells us what the light means. If there are star messengers, they speak both languages. They descend in symbols and ascend in numbers. They leave marks in dreams and blueprints. And if we are wise, we will answer in kind, building observatories and stories, telescopes and temples, so that across the ages the conversation does not end. Perhaps that is the whole secret. The star messengers were always here because they were always us in dialogue with the sky, sometimes hearing, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes astonished. The Black Night, if real, is one participant in a chorus that includes every shepherd who named a star for his child, every sailor who steered by Orion's belt, every mother who told a child that the Pleiades are seven sisters watching from above. The message is in the continuity. in the return, in the way our little lives set their clocks by lights that do not burn out when we do. And if somewhere above, a dark object listens and waits, then it too is a messenger, not merely of alien intent, but of our own capacity to pay attention to the universe and to be changed by what we find. They say ownership is one of humanity's most ancient instincts. We mark land with fences, we carve borders across deserts, we plant flags on mountain peaks and ocean floors. Even the moon was not beyond our symbolic grasp when astronauts left bootprints and banners in the lunar dust. And yet, when it comes to the mysterious object in Earth's orbit that legend calls the Black Knight, no nation has stepped forward to claim it. Not once, in all the decades of speculation, photographs, and whispers, has any government declared, "This belongs to us." The silence itself has become part of the mystery. At first glance, one might assume that nations stay quiet because there is nothing to claim. Official records dismiss the object as space debris, a misidentified satellite fragment, or an insulation blanket lost during assembly of the International Space Station. In that version of the story, the question of ownership never arises because the Black Knight is nothing but an illusion. And yet, beneath that dismissal lies an unease. For if the object truly were nothing, if it were simply a loose shard tumbling endlessly in orbit, would not someone have collected it by now? Would not NASA, or Roscosmos, or the European Space Agency have made a point of retrieving it, if only to silence the myth once and for all? Instead, it remains untouchable, drifting in silence, while governments politely pretend it does not exist. The truth is more complex. To claim ownership of the Black Knight would not only be scientifically risky, but politically catastrophic. International law, written at the dawn of the space age, explicitly forbids any nation from claiming sovereignty in space. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty, signed in the shadows of the Cold War, declared that no celestial body and no orbital territory could be annexed by earthly powers. Space, they said, was for all humankind. But what happens when the object in question is not natural, not a planet or a moon, but something artificial and possibly ancient? The treaties provide no clear guidance. To claim it would be to rewrite the rules of space, and no nation is willing to be the first to break that fragile consensus. There is also the problem of proof. If a country stood before the world and announced, "The Black Knight is ours," the very next question would be, "Show us the evidence." But how can evidence be shown of something that refuses to conform to ordinary observation? The photographs are grainy. The radar reports are inconclusive. The supposed radio transmissions remain locked in obscurity. Any government that dared to assert ownership would immediately find itself mocked, ridiculed, accused of chasing ghosts. In the cynical theater of international politics, ridicule can be more dangerous than fear. Better to stay silent, to let the mystery fester at the edges of public imagination, than to risk being the nation that tried to own a shadow. And yet, there is another layer, a darker one. For in the corridors of classified intelligence, there may already be files on the object. Files stamped, eyes only, buried in archives that will not see daylight for generations. If the Black Knight has ever been studied up close, if reconnaissance satellites or classified missions have captured better images, they are locked away, not shared. To admit such knowledge would be to confess vulnerability. Imagine a defense minister standing before Parliament and saying, "Yes, there is an object orbiting Earth. We do not know where it came from, and we cannot control it." That would be an admission of helplessness. And nations do not confess helplessness. They prefer silence, plausible deniability, the protective armor of pretending that nothing is there. But perhaps the most unsettling possibility is that no nation claims ownership because no nation truly can. What if the object is older than humanity's empires? What if it has orbited Earth not for decades, but for millennia, patiently watching, silently recording? In that case, to declare ownership would be to trespass against something beyond our comprehension. How can you claim what may belong to others? Others not of this earth, others who may return to collect what is theirs. The reluctance of governments may not be rooted only in law or politics, but in an unspoken fear that to claim the Black Knight is to invite a response. And who among us is prepared for that? In the myths of old, there were always objects that could not be owned, sacred relics, forbidden temples, cursed treasures. To touch them was to invoke wrath. The Black Knight has become a modern incarnation of this archetype. Floating high above, it is the orbital equivalent of a shrine no one dares to enter. Humanity circles it with satellites and shuttles, glimpses it in photos and radar scans, but leaves it untouched, unclaimed. Our silence is an act of reverence, or of fear, depending on how you choose to see it. Consider also the irony. In an age when nations fight bitterly over territory on Earth, when oceans and Arctic regions are carved into zones of influence, here is an object above all of us, visible to all, yet claimed by none. It is the one place where human greed has not yet reached. Perhaps this is coincidence. Perhaps it is caution. Or perhaps it is destiny, that some things in the heavens must remain unowned, reminders that the cosmos is not ours to divide like spoils. Some theorists even argue that the Black Knight resists ownership not only politically, but metaphysically. That it exists at the edges of perception in such a way that it cannot be possessed. The moment you try to define it, it slips into ambiguity. The moment you attempt to catalog it, it dissolves into noise. Like a shadow, it is real to the eye, but impossible to hold. Perhaps this is why it inspires so much myth. It exists in the realm of suggestion, where ownership is meaningless. And yet, despite all this, the legend grows stronger with every passing year. The absence of a claimant does not weaken the story. It strengthens it. For if any nation had stepped forward to claim the Black Knight, the mystery would have narrowed, become political, territorial, reduced to squabbles over jurisdiction. But because no one claims it, the Black Knight remains untamed, a free agent of myth, belonging to no flag and no government. It belongs instead to imagination itself, to all of us who look up at the stars and wonder who or what might be watching. Perhaps in the end, that is the greatest truth. The Black Knight's refusal to be owned mirrors the universe's refusal to be tamed. The stars cannot be possessed, the cosmos cannot be fenced, and the object in our skies, whether it is ancient alien probe or discarded insulation blanket, serves as a reminder that some mysteries cannot be reduced to property. They must remain mysteries. They must remain free. So the silence continues. No nation steps forward, no flag is raised, and the Black Knight, whatever it may be, drifts on, unclaimed, unmastered, untouchable, like a sentinel, or a secret, or a shadow that belongs not to one nation, but to all of Earth. And maybe, just maybe, to something beyond. There are whispers buried deep in Cold War archives and echoed through declassified fragments, that humanity has not always been content to simply observe the enigmatic presence drifting in the high dark above. To leave the Black Knight untouched was, in some circles, seen as weakness, as surrender. And so, the story goes, there were attempts, some cautious, some desperate, to reach it, to seize it, even to destroy it. If it was a relic of ancient watchers, perhaps it held secrets beyond imagination. If it was a threat, perhaps it needed to be silenced before it spoke. Either way, the Black Knight has not remained entirely beyond the reach of human ambition. We have tried, and failed, to touch it. The earliest rumors emerge in the 1950s and 1960s, at the height of the space race. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were struggling not just for control of Earth, but for mastery of the skies above it. Radar stations reported an anomalous object in polar orbit, too stable to be debris, too strange to be explained. To the militaries of both nations, that orbit was not neutral. It was threatening. A satellite moving north to south instead of east to west could watch the entire planet, including secret bases hidden in polar latitudes. Who had placed it there? Neither superpower could afford to admit it might belong to the other, and so there were murmurs of missions. Classified launches meant to match its orbit, to intercept it, to bring back proof of what it really was. None of these stories ever made it into official histories. No press releases, no triumphs, only hints. Rockets that launched and failed without explanation, satellites that vanished from telemetry after a few orbits, space capsules that were quietly written off as engineering mishaps. But some researchers believe that among these failures were covert attempts to rendezvous with the Black Knight. And if that is true, then humanity has already tried to touch it, and been rebuffed. There are darker tales still, of deliberate attempts to knock it from orbit. Some claim that in the late Cold War, when paranoia reached its fever pitch, anti-satellite weapons were tested not only on each other's machines, but on the unknown intruder. In 1985, the United States successfully used an F-15 fighter jet to launch a missile that destroyed an old American satellite in orbit. Officially, this was a demonstration of capability, a warning to the Soviets. Unofficially, some say it was practice for something else. And in the Soviet archives, now fragmentary and redacted, there are references to orbital interceptors, strange objects launched into high polar orbits with no clear targets, missions abandoned in silence. Could these have been aimed at the Black Knight? If so, none succeeded. The object remains, unmoved, orbiting still. Perhaps the most chilling reports come not from failed weapons tests, but from encounters gone wrong. Astronauts have whispered of equipment malfunctions, sudden power drops, instruments that went haywire whenever their spacecraft drew too near the shadowed side of the object's orbit. One story tells of a capsule that suffered a mysterious systems blackout while attempting to photograph a dark object against the Earth's limb. The astronauts returned alive, but shaken, their data corrupted, their memories hazy. Official accounts attributed the failure to mundane technical errors. But those who dig into the margins of history wonder, did the Black Knight defend itself, or does its very presence warp the fragile machines we send to meet it? If one considers the logic of human ambition, the attempts make sense. To possess the Black Knight would be to rewrite history. Imagine dragging it into low orbit, tethering it to the International Space Station, cracking it open like a vault. What knowledge might be found inside? Proof of alien contact? A map of human destiny? Or nothing but silence? The risk is staggering, but the temptation is greater still. And so, at least in whispers, it is said that governments and private actors alike have sought to capture it. None have succeeded. None even admit to trying. Why then does it remain untouched? Perhaps because it is harder to reach than we imagine. Its orbit, strange and shifting, is not easily matched. The delta V required, the energy needed to intercept an object in polar orbit, is immense. Rockets must climb not just high, but into paths rarely traveled. And for what? To chase a rumor? Engineers and commanders weigh the cost against the ridicule, and missions are canceled before they begin. The Black Knight endures because reaching it is too costly, too uncertain, too fraught with danger. And yet, there is another possibility. That attempts have been made, but the object itself refuses capture, that it moves when threatened, altering its orbit just enough to evade. Some claim that whenever interceptors draw near, the Black Knight drifts into shadow, vanishes from radar, reappears elsewhere, as if it knows, as if it chooses not to be caught. If true, then it is not simply debris, but something alive with intention, or at least programmed with purpose. In that case, attempts to deorbit it are not only doomed, but arrogant. You cannot unmake what was designed to outlast you. In myth and folklore, there are always forbidden objects, relics that punish those who touch them. The Ark of the Covenant struck men dead who laid hands upon it. The cursed gold of ancient kings brought ruin to those who claimed it. Perhaps the Black Knight is the cosmic heir to this archetype, untouchable, unclaimable, immune to theft. The more we try to reach it, the more it eludes us, and so it drifts like a test of humility, asking whether humanity can accept that not everything above us is ours to own or destroy. If nations did attempt to destroy it and failed, then their silence is understandable. Imagine the embarrassment of admitting to the world, we fired missiles into space at something we cannot explain, and they did nothing. Better to hide the failure, bury it in technical jargon, pretend the mission never happened. This is how secrecy perpetuates itself. Failures are erased, and the object remains, cloaked in rumor. But silence is not the same as surrender. Even now, there are those who dream of capturing it. Private corporations, billionaire visionaries, entrepreneurs of the new space age. They imagine towing it into low orbit, mining it for secrets, broadcasting their triumph to the world. Yet even they hesitate. For what if, in trying, they awaken something? What if the object is not inert, but waiting? To tamper with it may not only risk ridicule or failure, but consequences no one can predict. The cost of success might be greater than the cost of leaving it alone. And so, the Black Knight continues its silent vigil. Attempts to intercept it fade into rumor, into classified footnotes, into denials and evasions. It is as though the object itself enforces its solitude, swatting away our rockets like flies, refusing to be pulled from its ancient orbit. If it is a probe, then it has outlasted empires. If it is debris, then it has defied decay. Either way, it remains beyond our reach, a reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be solved by force. Perhaps the greatest lesson is this: in trying to conquer the Black Knight, we reveal more about ourselves than about the object. We show our impatience, our arrogance, our inability to accept what cannot be owned. And the object, unmoved, teaches us humility. It drifts on, untouched, immune to our missiles and ambitions, a shadow against the stars, watching, waiting, while humanity gnashes its teeth below. Attempts have been made, yes, but they have failed. And in that failure lies the heart of the mystery. For if humanity, with all its rockets and weapons and pride, cannot seize or destroy this solitary sentinel, then perhaps the Black Knight is not meant to be touched at all. Perhaps its very survival is its message, a reminder that some things in the cosmos are beyond our grasp, beyond our control, beyond even our imagination. There is a question that lingers like a shadow behind every discussion of the Black Knight satellite. If it has truly been circling our world for thousands of years, what is it doing there? Objects in space do not remain in orbit by accident for 13,000 years. They decay, they drift, they burn away in the atmosphere. And yet, if the Black Knight has endured since the age of the first civilizations, then perhaps it is not only surviving, but serving a purpose. Perhaps it is not debris, not refuse, but something deliberate. And if it is deliberate, then the most haunting possibility is this: that it is watching us. From the very beginning, humans have imagined eyes in the sky. The gods of Mesopotamia were said to see from the heavens, their gaze falling upon kings and peasants alike. The ancient Egyptians spoke of the eye of Horus, the ever-vigilant symbol that could observe the living and the dead. In the Celtic myths, Druidic seers spoke of stars that listened and responded to the thoughts of mortals. In Vedic traditions, the gods were described as skywalkers, messengers whose vision encompassed the earth. In China, the celestial dragons coiled through the heavens, watching the dynasties rise and fall. In Greece, the titans were said to dwell above the vault of the sky, their eyes fixed upon mortal affairs. These stories might not be mere mythology. They may be fractured memories, distorted retellings of something real, an object above that has always been present, always watching. Imagine a probe launched when humans were still learning fire and stone, sent into orbit not to announce itself, but to wait. Imagine it watching as tribes became kingdoms, as kingdoms became empires, as empires rose and fell into dust. Every flicker of human advancement, every step into technology, recorded silently by a machine drifting overhead. What would it have seen? The wheel, the plow, the bronze sword, the written word carved into clay tablets, the spread of cities, the glow of firelight seen from orbit, the birth of philosophy, the rise of religion, the fall of Rome, the ships of Columbus cutting across an ocean. It would have seen the smoke of our wars, the first glow of our cities, the trembling light of nuclear fire. It would have watched as we launched our own machines into orbit, machines that suddenly revealed to us the possibility that we might not be the first to do so. This is the unsettling thought, that we are not the discoverers, but the discovered, that our progress has been under surveillance longer than our recorded history. If so, what is the point of such monitoring? It could be benign, an interstellar field study, a long-term experiment in watching a species climb out of its cradle. Perhaps some distant intelligence launched the Black Knight, the way we send probes to Jupiter or Saturn, to observe without interfering, to gather data. But there is another, darker possibility, that the purpose is not study, but control. That by watching, it shapes. That by recording, it influences. That the very knowledge of being observed subtly alters the path we take. Whispers of this idea ripple through conspiracy communities, where the Black Knight is seen not only as an alien probe, but as a sentinel. Some believe it is programmed to awaken when humanity achieves spaceflight, to send back a message. They are ready. Others believe it waits for a specific threshold, the splitting of the atom, the reaching of the moon, the launch of the first artificial satellites. Already, they say, the conditions have been met. Already the Watcher has marked us as entering the next phase of development. And yet, its silence continues, perhaps waiting for something even greater, something we have not yet achieved. One cannot escape the eerie parallel between the Black Knight and the concept of the zoo hypothesis in modern astrophysics. Scientists puzzled by the so-called Fermi paradox, the question of why, if intelligent life exists elsewhere, we have not encountered it, sometimes suggest that we are deliberately being avoided. Like animals in a reserve, we are allowed to grow without interference, walled off from the wider galaxy until we reach maturity. If the Black Knight is truly in orbit, then it could be the instrument of that isolation, the keeper of the fence, the watchtower on the edge of our invisible enclosure. Consider Nikola Tesla's mysterious radio signals at the turn of the 20th century, signals he believed came from space. At the time, no one could explain them. Some dismissed them as natural radio waves from the cosmos, others as error. But what if they were real? What if, in our first clumsy attempts to listen beyond Earth, we intercepted the reply of a watcher who had been listening far longer than we had been speaking? Later, ham radio operators and astronomers would claim to detect long-delayed echoes, signals that returned seconds, sometimes minutes after being sent. Some believed this was simply atmospheric reflection. Others believed it was something else, a satellite high above, repeating back our own words to remind us that we were not speaking into a void, but into ears that had always been listening. If it is monitoring us, the question becomes even more unnerving. Who or what is receiving the data? Is the Black Knight transmitting back to some distant star system, its signals faint but steady across the centuries? Or is it storing the information, waiting for retrieval by those who sent it? Perhaps the watchers return only when their subject has reached a certain stage, or perhaps they are gone, extinct, and their probe has continued its mission, tireless and blind, long after its masters have vanished. A relic, gathering data no one will ever read. And yet, whether active or abandoned, the effect is the same. It means humanity is not as alone as it thinks. Our history has been accompanied by a silent witness, and to be watched is to be changed. And for if we are under observation, then everything we do, our wars, our art, our exploration, is part of a larger stage, a performance we do not even know we are giving. Perhaps that is why the Black Knight remains in shadow, never openly intervening. Its purpose is not to guide, but to record. And in being recorded, we are transformed. But there is another layer to this idea, more unsettling still. What if it is not only monitoring our technology, but our consciousness? What if it is watching not just the noise we make, but the way we think? Ancient shamans, Celtic druids, and Vedic mystics spoke of stars that communicated with the human mind, inspirations that came not from within, but from above. What if the Black Knight is not just an observer, but an influencer? A subtle hand shaping the direction of our myths, our religions, our stories of the gods. In this view, it is not just a machine, but a teacher. One we cannot recognize, one that speaks in symbols and archetypes rather than words. In Mesoamerican belief, the sky gods kept track of human rituals and sacrifices, ensuring the balance of the cosmos. In Hopi prophecy, there were watchers among the stars who would one day return when humanity reached a dangerous turning point. The Mayan codices depicted beings descending from celestial boats, keeping record of human deeds. Could these myths have been echoes of an awareness, an unconscious recognition, that something above was keeping score? If the Black Knight is real, then the myths of the Watchers are not just stories, they are history, retold through the lens of human imagination. No nation claims it. No scientist officially recognizes it. And yet, it remains. If it is real, then its silence is the loudest message of all. Because what is silence, if not the most patient form of communication? To orbit for millennia, saying nothing, is itself a statement. It is the stance of a being with infinite time, watching to see how long it takes for the fledgling race below to notice, to wonder, to question. We are noticing now. We are questioning now. Perhaps that is what it has been waiting for. Think of the implications if such surveillance is true. Every human invention, every turning point in history, is not simply our own achievement, but part of a report filed away in the memory of a probe. When the Library of Alexandria burned, did the Black Knight log the loss of knowledge? When the Renaissance sparked, did it mark the sudden burst of light in a long night of darkness? When we detonated the first atomic bomb, did it send an alert, an emergency signal across the stars to say, They have discovered fire again, this time on a planetary scale. And what of art, of music, of love? Does it measure these things as data points, or does it fail to see them at all? Perhaps its creators wished only to know when we would split the atom, when we would cross the oceans of space. But perhaps they wished to know if we were capable of beauty, of empathy, of unity. What if the Black Knight is less a machine and more a mirror, reflecting not what we build, but what we are? And what if the silence has always been a test, waiting to see whether we can notice not only the stars above, but ourselves? Even stranger is the idea that it may not be passive at all, but active in subtle ways. Perhaps the dreams of prophets, the visions of mystics, the flashes of inspiration that gave birth to revolutions, were nudges from the watcher, small impulses carefully placed, designed not to control, but to cultivate. A gardener's hand guiding the growth of a wild plant. If so, then our civilizations have grown in dialogue with something we do not even acknowledge, an invisible partner in the dance of history. This idea reshapes the very notion of free will. Are we moving through history of our own accord, or are we being quietly steered? The myths of angels and muses, the sudden discoveries that seem to arrive from nowhere, could they all be echoes of a transmission from orbit? Could the Black Knight's watchfulness extend into the most intimate realm of all, the human mind itself? And then comes the most haunting question of all. What happens when we finally meet its gaze directly? When we not only see it, but prove it, acknowledge it, engage with it? Will it answer? Will it awaken? Or will it vanish? Its mission complete, leaving us with the knowledge that we were never alone and never unobserved. Until then, the Black Knight remains above, its purpose inscrutable, its presence disputed, its silence profound. Perhaps it is only a shadow, an illusion born of misidentified signals and misinterpreted photographs. Or perhaps it is exactly what it seems, a sentinel older than all our histories, watching patiently as we stumble, as we fight, as we dream, as we rise, waiting for us to become something worth remembering. And perhaps that is the lesson, that we are never as small, never as private, as we think we are. That history itself has always had a witness, circling far above, keeping its own record of our becoming. The Black Knight waits, silent and enduring, and in its shadow we are left to ask, are we the authors of our own story, or only the subjects of a tale already being told? What if the Black Knight satellite is not just a silent observer, not just a recorder of our progress, but an active participant in the fate of humanity? What if its orbiting presence for 13,000 years has carried with it a function so profound and terrifying that it could alter the course of our entire civilization? The power to trigger or to prevent disasters. Suddenly, this object in the sky ceases to be a curiosity. It becomes something closer to a judge, a sentinel that can tip the scales of destiny itself. Across human history, people have looked to the skies in moments of catastrophe. Comets, eclipses, and strange lights were seen as omens. Before the fall of Rome, records tell of fiery objects streaking across the night. Before plague swept across medieval Europe, villagers spoke of dark objects hovering above the land, blotting out stars. The Aztecs believed that certain celestial signs warned them of doom. The Chinese dynasties saw eclipses as a verdict upon their emperors. What if these were not random? What if behind the veil of myth and superstition there was something real, a dark, orbiting sentinel, present not only to watch, but to act when balance had been lost? Imagine that for millennia, the Black Knight has functioned as a kind of planetary safeguard, or perhaps a planetary correction. It watches as human societies grow, as they reach thresholds of technology, as they experiment with forces they cannot control. And when we cross a certain line, when the trajectory threatens to veer too far, the Watcher intervenes. Not openly, not with thunderbolts or armies, but with nudges. Subtle, devastating nudges. A famine here, a plague there. A war sparked by a small event magnified beyond proportion. A volcano erupting at precisely the moment a civilization has overextended itself. Were these natural disasters always natural? Or were they sometimes carefully timed resets, triggered to pull humanity back from destruction, or to prevent it from becoming too dangerous too quickly? Consider the story of Atlantis, the legendary civilization destroyed in a single day and night. Some say it was a parable. Others insist it was history, a culture annihilated not by accident, but by judgment. If a probe had been orbiting above the Earth for 13,000 years, then it would have been present at the time Plato describes. Was Atlantis' destruction a natural catastrophe, or was it a deliberate act by a machine whose mission was to manage human destiny? If the Black Night is real, then perhaps every myth of a great flood, every story of divine punishment, every tale of fire raining from the sky, is not mere imagination, but memory. Memory of interventions carried out by something we did not understand. And yet, there is another possibility, that the Black Night is not a punisher, but a protector, that its role is not to destroy, but to preserve. Perhaps disasters that could have ended humanity entirely were averted by its silent hand. Perhaps the asteroid that should have hit did not. Perhaps the solar flare that should have stripped away our atmosphere weakened mysteriously before it reached Earth. Perhaps the pandemics that should have wiped us out instead receded. We never saw the danger that never reached us. We never saw the catastrophe that was prevented. And so, we assume survival was chance, when it may have been by design. But which is it? Is the satellite a destroyer or a guardian? Or could it be both? A balancing force, one that intervenes not to harm or to help, but to maintain equilibrium, like a scale that tips back and forth, ensuring that no single outcome spirals out of control. One age, it may trigger the fall of a reckless empire. Another age, it may prevent a catastrophe that would erase us entirely. Either way, the implication is staggering. Our history is not solely our own. Our disasters and our salvations may have been shaped by something watching from above. Think of the Cold War, when humanity's hand hovered over the nuclear trigger. Reports from the era tell of unexplained radar anomalies, of missiles that failed to launch despite no technical cause, of sudden system resets in nuclear command centers. Some chalk these up to glitches, to human error, to luck. But what if it was not luck? What if it was the Black Night intervening, preventing humanity from annihilating itself too soon? We speak of near misses, Cuba in 1962, false alarms in the 1980s, moments when civilization teetered on the edge of destruction, and yet, we survived. What if survival was not accidental, but engineered? What if the object above had already determined that we were not meant to end? Not yet. At the same time, we cannot forget the darker events, the world wars that tore across continents, the pandemics that swept millions into graves, the earthquakes, the tsunamis, the eruptions that seemed almost timed to strike civilizations at their peak. What if these were also part of the same hand? What if they were not punishments, but corrections? Calculated strikes to prevent humanity from expanding too fast, from reaching technologies we were not prepared to handle. If so, then the Black Night is less an enemy or a friend, and more like a gardener pruning branches so the tree may survive. Cold, indifferent, necessary. Religions may have intuited this role long before science gave it language. In the Old Testament, disasters were seen as judgments from above. In Hindu cosmology, the cycles of destruction and rebirth are overseen by deities who maintain cosmic order. In Norse myths, Ragnarok is not an accident, but an ordained reset. Again and again, cultures encode the belief that catastrophe is not random, but chosen. Was this intuition born from patterns too subtle to explain? Or from an ancient recognition that the sky itself was watching, and sometimes intervening? Even today, when satellites track storms and predict earthquakes, we still cannot shake the feeling that disasters carry meaning. When towers fall, when oceans rise, when fire spreads across continents, we ask, why here? Why now? The science gives us mechanics, but it does not give us purpose. The Black Night, if real, provides that missing piece. It suggests that disasters may not only be mechanical, but intentional, that there is a system, a logic, behind the chaos. And yet, this brings us to the most unsettling question of all. Who decides? If the Black Night is shaping the course of humanity, then who programmed it? Are they still out there, watching as their ancient probe continues its mission? Or has the machine been left to its own devices, carrying out commands written long ago by hands that are now dust? And if so, does it still understand its purpose, or is it following protocols blindly, triggering and preventing with no comprehension of the meaning? Could our lives be governed by an algorithm, a set of rules that no one remembers, a cosmic code running endlessly while we struggle below? Imagine the terror and the wonder of realizing that every disaster we face, every crisis we survive, may be part of a greater pattern. We are not the masters of our fate, but actors in a script written long before us, with cues we cannot see and a director we cannot reach. And yet, perhaps there is comfort in it too. For if the Black Knight is watching, then we are not alone in the storm. Our disasters, our tragedies, are not meaningless. They are part of something larger, a test, a shaping, a preparation. And so the satellite remains, circling above, silent and unseen. Perhaps it will act again when the time is right. Perhaps it has already acted, and we will never know. Perhaps the next disaster that reshapes our world will not be chance, but choice. Not our choice, but its. The question we must ask is not only whether the Black Knight exists, but whether it has already touched our lives, in the wars we fought, in the catastrophes we endured, in the near misses that spared us. And if it has, then what role will it play in the future? Will it bring ruin or deliverance? Will it end us or save us? Or will it continue as it always has, patient, unblinking, waiting to decide when the scales tip too far? What if the Black Knight satellite is not merely a rock mistaken for machinery, nor debris drifting endlessly from our own creations, but in fact an engineered machine? This is the question that pulls at the deepest threads of our imagination, because if it is a machine, then it carries intent. And if it carries intent, then someone somewhere, at some time, made the choice to send it. The question is not only who, but why. Let us first imagine the most ancient of possibilities, that it is not alien at all, but human, or rather, pre-human. Could there have been a civilization on this planet, long before the rise of Sumer or Egypt, long before ice sheets melted and seas rose, that had already mastered the stars? Myths whisper of Atlantis, of Lemuria, of forgotten ages when humanity soared too high, only to be undone by hubris and disaster. If such a civilization existed, then perhaps the Black Knight is their legacy, a sentinel left in orbit to watch, to record, to wait until their children, thousands of generations later, reach the sky once more. In this view, the Black Knight is not alien, but ancestral, a voice from our own forgotten past, trying to bridge the abyss of time. But what if it is older still? What if it comes not from Earth, but from another star? Another people who saw in our world a seed worth protecting, or monitoring, or exploiting. Imagine beings who navigated the galaxy when we were still painting caves with ochre and ash. For them, Earth would have been a laboratory, a garden, or perhaps a test. They may have placed the machine above us as a recorder, its dark body a black box collecting the story of human struggle. Every war, every song, every leap of progress might be archived in its silence. And if so, then who will read those records? Who, in the void, waits for the story of humanity to be delivered? Some have imagined another possibility, one that is not cosmic, but temporal, that the Black Knight is not a relic of the past, but of the future, sent not from other worlds, but from our own descendants, reaching back through time. Perhaps it is a warning, a gift, or an anchor to ensure the future unfolds a certain way. Imagine a machine designed by humanity in some distant millennium, launched backward to keep watch on its own beginnings, to ensure that the fragile thread of history does not unravel. If this is true, then the machine above us is not alien at all. It is our shadow, our reflection, our future hand extended into our present. Yet the why remains even more haunting than the who. If it was sent to monitor, then what is it looking for? Our mistakes, our potential, our moment of readiness. Perhaps it is waiting for a signal from us, a threshold of maturity, a point at which we are worthy of contact. Or perhaps it is waiting for failure, to record not our triumphs but our collapse, to archive the story of another species that reached for the stars only to fall back into silence. And what if it was not meant for us at all? What if the Black Knight was placed here as part of a network, a chain of machines circling countless worlds, each one watching, each one gathering data for a civilization so vast and ancient that we cannot even comprehend its scale? In that case, we are not the chosen. We are merely one among billions of monitored species, one node in an infinite web of observation. And the machine above us is just another file in a library that stretches across the stars. There is, too, the darker possibility. What if the Black Knight is not a guardian or an archivist, but a warden, a lock, a device designed to keep the humanity within certain boundaries to ensure that we do not rise too far, too fast. Perhaps it is not watching to protect us, but to control us, to prevent us from reaching beyond our planet until a certain condition is met, or until we are deemed safe. If so, then every failed launch, every unexplained malfunction, every strange anomaly in our exploration of space may not be accident or error, but intervention. The unseen hand of the Black Knight reminding us that the cage is not yet open, but to ask who sent it is also to confront the abyss of motive. If it was built by ancient humans, then it may have been an act of hope, to preserve their memory, to ensure their descendants would not forget. If it was built by aliens, then it may have been an act of science, to study, to classify, to catalog another world's experiment with consciousness. And if it was built by our own future selves, then it may have been an act of desperation, a way to influence the past, to prevent some disaster that would otherwise destroy us. Hope, science, desperation, 3 different motives, 3 different senders, all converging on the same enigma that circles our sky. And so, we are left with questions that feel like mirrors. Did someone look at Earth and see potential? Did they see danger? Did they see themselves? Are we the experiment, the subject, or the heir? Are we being judged, or prepared, or merely observed as indifferent data points in a cosmic ledger? The silence of the Black Knight provides no answers. It only deepens the questions, widening the gap between what we know and what we fear. Imagine, one night, standing beneath the stars and realizing that for every step you take, every word you speak, every thought you breathe into the night, there is something above that already knows. Not God, not a myth, but a machine, built long before your time, carrying instructions written by hands you will never shake, minds you will never meet. Does this make our lives smaller or infinitely more significant? To be watched is to be acknowledged. To be acknowledged is to matter. And perhaps that is the strangest answer of all. The Black Knight, if it is a machine, may not need a why beyond the simplest of motives, to ensure we are not alone, that someone cared enough, whether they were ancient humans, distant aliens, or future descendants, to place a sentinel in the sky and to say, "You are not forgotten. You are part of something larger." But until we reach it, until we touch it, until we break its silence, we will never know whether that message is one of love, or of warning, or of cold indifference. And so it circles above, as it has for thousands of years, a question written in metal and silence. Who sent it? Why? The answer may define not only our past, but our future. And perhaps, when we are ready, it will finally reveal which it was meant to be.